I always like to start off the podcast with a couple of rapid fire questions, so you can keep it really short and sweet, and then we'll get to some more conversational questions.
Sure.
First one is, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California, just outside of Santa Barbara.
Okay, and where do you live now?
I'm in Perth, Australia. And I should say that we then moved up to Seattle area in Kirkland, Washington when I was about 10. So my family's still up there now. And then I've lived in San Diego, then Europe, and different parts of Europe, and now Perth.
Quite a bit of places.
Mm.
Um, what's one of your favorite books?
Oh, I mean, there's a ton. Um, I think probably just because it's more on my mind is probably anything by Dr. Tom Sowell. Um, is oh god, they're all great, but like
You can
wealth,
name a
poverty,
couple.
yeah, like wealth, poverty, and politics is fantastic, um, and economic facts and fallacies, applied economics. I loved all those books. All of his books I've always loved. All of his writing, all of his talks, everything like that are just amazing. And yeah, those are some of my favorite books. Are his. They're obviously nonfiction. Other ones would be probably more in the classics sort of arena. Like I really like um, different historical works and things like by Thucydides and Sophocles, things like that. I've actually those are
Hmm.
some of my favorite writings as well. Um,
Okay.
yeah, sort of that.
Would you say you grew up being a reader, just one of those people that really loved reading books?
Yeah, definitely. My mom, well, my whole family were always very interested in reading and just liked learning and reading. And my mom, was a big reader, so we got a lot of that from her. My dad was a big reader as well, but so we had books read to us. Books were always very important to us. 90% of our Christmas presents were books, generally, things that my mom picked out. And yeah, so I've always read, since I was a kid. And then when I've been more busy, driving to work or working out or something like that, I listen to books on tape. So I always try to keep something going at all times.
Okay, cool. What's one of your superpowers?
My superpowers,
Yeah.
um, probably to deal with my schedule and not die. That seems to be a superpower.
Yes.
I'm going insane. Yeah, I work basically 7 days a week. Right now, I'm taking a bit of time off from the hospital, so that's taken a big load off. But normally, I'm working at least 6 days a week in neurosurgery, if not 7 days a week, and doing multiple on calls during the week where it's very busy. So I'm working all day, all night, and all day the next day, or all weekend, and
Jeez.
then the next week, and then a couple nights that week. And and then on the weekends that I'm not at the hospital, I'm in my private practice in functional medicine, metabolic health, and in the evenings when I have evenings free, I'm doing podcast interviews and uploading my videos and doing all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. So it's basically, every waking hour is dedicated to some sort of work, and then I've got to read and I've got to study and I've got to do all these other sorts of things. So it's very busy, and I would not be able to do that normally. I mean, my intern year, I was doing like 100, hours, sometimes 120 hours a week, and week after week after week after week. And I hated it. It was the longest year of my life. It was just absolutely awful. Now I'm working similar hours, probably a bit more, doing the things on the side that I chosen to do, and it's fine. I can do it, and I definitely attribute that to my diet.
Yeah, yeah, sure. We'll get to it at the end because I'm also amazed at how much you get done. We'll talk about that at the end. And then last rapid fire question here is, what do you feel is holding people back from finding success in their health?
Oh, just there's just so much information out there and so much misinformation out there. It's very hard for people to know what the hell to eat. I mean, I didn't know. I ate the way that we were told to eat for a long time, and I played high level sports, and I was as healthy as I could be at the time. But eating differently has certainly changed my health and my athletic performance and my mental acuity and my performance at work as well has made a massive, massive difference. So unfortunately, we've just been inundated with a lot of misinformation, a lot of conflicting information. So it's very hard for people to parse out exactly what the hell they're supposed to do. They want to. I think that
Hmm.
99.99% of people out there really do care about their health and want to eat right and live right to have the healthiest life that they can. But they just they follow one path or the other, and it may not be the right one.
Yeah. And that's like across the board. Medical school is not much clearer in terms of nutrition.
Yeah.
Um, but we'll jump into that. So let's get just for the people who don't know about you, like, can you share a little bit about your carnivore journey, the reasons that led you to adopt the carnivore diet, just a little bit of a background of what got you here?
Yeah. So I started eating exclusively meat about 23 years ago when I was taking cancer biology in my undergraduate degree at University of Washington in Seattle, and I, was just in this class, and we were talking about how plants actually use toxins to defend themselves, which I knew already because I studied biology, I studied botany, and so I was like, okay, that makes sense. But even the plants that we eat, and even the produce that we eat on a normal daily basis, and it's like, okay, well, I guess that makes sense, but presumably there's more good than bad. And then we talked about how actually some of these things were actually carcinogenic, and actually, significantly so, like more so than the pesticides we spray on them by a large margin. There's a study in out of UC Berkeley in 1989 by Professor Bruce Haynes, where actually found that the different naturally occurring toxins, first of all, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of them in each plant, and dozens of them were carcinogenic, and that the ones like specifically found in like white mushrooms, that we use for as a normal staple of our diet, those were actually 500 times more carcinogenic than the pesticides that we would spray on them at the time. So that was quite eye-opening. We started looking at all the different carcinogens that were in different produce items. Like Brussels sprouts had over 136 identified carcinogens, or specifically 136 identified carcinogens. Mushrooms had over 100, but spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, all these things had dozens, if not over 100 known carcinogens, and we know that they were abundant. That same paper from Bruce Haynes showed that there were 10,000 times more naturally occurring toxins in the vegetables that we eat than the pesticides we sprayed on them. And so that was quite a wake up call to all of us. We were all very, very shocked and surprised. I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And our professor just looked at us sort of funny, and he said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I said, right, forget plants. And I just defaulted into only eating meat because what else is there to eat? You're eating,
Yeah.
there's plants and meat. And so you stop eating plants. And that was my entire motivation, was I'm not going to eat any plants. And so I just stopped eating plants entirely and just started eating eggs and meat. So like, well, what the hell else do I eat? And for a couple of weeks, I was just thinking about how limited I was. I was looking at all the things that I couldn't eat, and I was like, oh, this sucks. But after about 2 weeks, I just didn't care anymore. The only thing I wanted to eat was meat and eggs. I was really excited to eat meat and eggs. I felt amazing. My health dramatically improved in every single detail, and my athletic performance as a rugby player just went through the roof. I was much more fit, much more capable, much more able than all of my teammates, just physically, and my endurance and fitness was just through the roof, and it just kept getting better and better. And so my trajectory as an athlete improved much quicker than my peers around me. So it was a huge difference, and I noticed that for years and years and years, until I moved to England. I was playing professionally, and I just sort of slipped off of it because some of the meat was breaded, and I didn't realize just how significant what I was doing was. I thought, well, maybe a bit of breading, is that
Hmm.
big of a deal? It's a bit of crumbing on the chicken, like dose makes the poison. Maybe it's just a little bit. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not going to make that much of a difference, but it did make a difference. I absolutely noticed it making a difference. I remember thinking to myself, why am I not feeling as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? And I chalked it up to maybe I wasn't working as hard. I was 25. I was just over the hill, and just like, my body's just dying now. And because that's what people tell you, you get over you get over 25 and just it's just downhill from there. And
Yeah.
but the main thing that that did is it got me out of that mindset of I will eat no plants. And so a little bit more came in, a little bit more came in, and before I knew it, I was just eating more of a whole food meat based diet with whole fruit, with whole fruits and vegetables, and but with carbs and things like that as well. But I never ate junk food, really. I mean, like very rarely. But I would went back to eating a more standard whole food diet, and I didn't feel as good. I wasn't having the performance I had before. I was still playing high level rugby. I played in the Canadian Premier League, and I've also played in the U.S. Super League, and I felt great. And then I went to medical school. I was playing during medical school in one of the top leagues in Ireland, just below Premiership. It was the All Ireland League 1A, so it was a top league, and that was great. But obviously didn't have the same time availability when I was in medical school, so it was just more for fun at that point. But then at 38, when I now been a doctor for several years and just got back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, and I sort of rediscovered this whole idea of just eating meat and how like no, humans biologically actually are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal that we are. And that's what I was doing for those 5 years. And that's why I felt just so incredibly amazing. And I said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I just dumped the vegetables. I wasn't eating carbs and sugar at the time anyway. And then I just started eating a lot more fatty meat because the research had come out at that point saying that actually fat's good for you. Cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease. It's actually an important vital nutrient that we need. And so I started eating a lot more of it, and my health dramatically improved. My body habits just changed. I lost 23 pounds in 10 days, and I just started transforming, getting much more muscular, much more lean. And I just felt amazing. 2 weeks after that, I just said, right, I'm going back to play rugby. And so I went out and started playing rugby again with my team in Seattle, the Seattle Saracens, who then turned into the Seattle Seawolves, who are the professional Major League Rugby team in Seattle. And that was the first year that had gone professional. So I started playing with them, all the professional players who were in their early to mid 20s, most of them, some of them late 20s, 30s, something like that. And and I was right there with them. They'd been training for months. I'd just been in refugee camps, and I was at a dead sprint and just able to keep up and practice at a very high level. And so I felt great. And even though I was clearly out of shape and overweight, I was able to move and play and perform at a much better level than I should have been. And I felt better at 38, fat and out of shape, than when I was 27, fit, playing high level rugby and training all the time. And that was completely down to my diet. And so since then, I've really done a deep dive into the literature to find out what we know, what we can prove, and what still needs to be figured out.
Interesting. You definitely had and you've always had a busy schedule, doing the med school and rugby. So you kind
Mm,
of been in this crazy schedule for quite a few years, and that's really cool. I find it interesting that you're able to find a noticeable difference when you went from just pure carnivore to adding some whole foods, healthy veggies and fruits. When you
mm.
when you first switched to carnivore at the very beginning, how was that switch? Did it take a while? Did you have any side effects of switching to just meat?
I didn't have any side effects that I noticed. The first 2 weeks, all I noticed really was just everything I couldn't eat. I didn't feel any health ramifications at all. I felt great, but I was just looking at like, oh, I can't have that, and oh, what I should have. Oh, I can't have that. That's plant. Oh, and that has plants, and that has plants, and that has everything has plants.
Yeah.
And so health wise, no, I felt fine. And then
Okay.
after about 2 weeks, all the cravings left, and I just stopped caring about all the things I couldn't eat. I didn't even look at them as food anymore, and all I wanted to eat was meat and eggs. So I actually felt better right from the get go. And even when I did it the second time around, again, I just everything improved right away. My energy improved, my endurance improved, my workouts improved. Some people take a bit longer than that. Some people have a dip in their energy and their workouts.
Hmm.
I was one of the lucky ones. I just right from the beginning, I just took off, and but most people, it usually only takes 2 to 3 weeks until they get into that sweet spot anyway, metabolically. So as long as they're just really just eating meat and water, not using any sweeteners at all, no artificial sweeteners, not taking whole fruit
Right.
sugar and all these sorts of things like that, which is a common way for people to not have as much success as they could have.
Yeah. I laugh at that because my wife and I use some sweeteners, and I do notice the hunger signals that it continues
Mm.
to encourage. After listening
Yeah.
to some more of your podcasts, I'm like, oh yeah, that's it pans out.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are conflicting studies, and there are people that are defenders of artificial sweeteners that say that they're good or they're not bad for whatever reasons, and they have certain endpoints and markers that they're saying, well, this is why I'm saying that. Fine. But there are studies as well that show that you can actually have reactive hypoglycemia, meaning that and a rise in your insulin as well. So you're getting this sweet taste in your mouth, and that's triggering insulin release, but you're not getting sugar. So now your blood sugar is going to go too low, but it's also going to lock down your fat stores because it blocks lipolysis, it blocks proteolysis. So in layman's terms, it forces energy into cells, but it doesn't allow it to come out of cells. And
Mhm.
so once your insulin goes up, now you're locked down. You're not going to be able to mobilize ketones or glucose or glycogen. And you're not taking in any glucose either. So now your blood sugar drops and you
Yeah,
sort of feel like garbage. And you have to wait for that insulin to go down again before you can start mobilizing your energy. And so it just sort of, takes the wheels off the bus. People are saying, "Oh, well, my energy is just really bad. I'm just not feeling good," and a lot of the time it's because they're still using these sweeteners. Maybe they're even using a pre-workout drink,
yeah,
that gets them up and they feel good for a while, and then they crash. Oh, I just feel rotten afterwards. Well, I think it's more to do with the artificial sweeteners, and sometimes people may be coming off caffeine and coffee and just withdrawing from that. You just sort of it takes a bit of time to catch up, or you need to become fat adapted, keto adapted, whatever you want to call it, and have your body properly produce and run on ketones efficiently, and
yeah.
make your own glucose as well through gluconeogenesis. So there's a lot of things that can play into that. But artificial sweeteners, I think, absolutely do fall into to the mix as well.
Going off of things to avoid, can you talk a little bit about why the elimination of carbohydrates is so important? And then under that, just the impact of fructose.
Yeah. So for carbohydrates in general, um, carbohydrates fundamentally shift our metabolic system and our biochemistry away from a fat utilizing system where we can mobilize our fat stores and we can make blood sugar and glycogen and ketones and constantly replenish them. So we don't have to just keep feeding the beast and just keep eating carbs and eating carbs. You have to eat carbs to burn carbs. That's what they say. Well, only
Hmm.
if you eat carbs in the first place. If you eat no carbs at all, then you make all the carbs that you need. You make all the ketones that you need. Once you start eating carbohydrates, your insulin goes up, and that shuts that all down, right? Because that stops all the energy production from your fat stores. And I think that's in a protective mechanism as well, because hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, is actually very damaging to us. The glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules and damage them permanently, and this is quite harmful. And our body recognizes this. This is what kills diabetics: is chronically high
Hmm.
blood sugar, and it destroys their body from within, and then the correspondingly high insulin just disrupts our normal functioning throughout our body. I mean, hormonally, even too. In women, this is a major driver of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because when insulin is high, it actually blocks the conversion of testosterone into estrogen in the ovaries. And so women get too much testosterone and not enough estrogen, and they can develop PCOS. As you can
Right.
get, it can change your body habitus. You can get hirsutism, so facial hair and male pattern hair, body hair, and obviously can disrupt your hormonal cycles as well. It's the leading cause of infertility in women in America and most of the Western world, and most common cause of PCOS is hyperinsulinemia. So this is why some doctors are even calling PCOS type 4 diabetes, type 3 diabetes
Oh,
being Alzheimer's. And
yeah.
so, this is all sort of coming back to these metabolic issues, and so many other diseases seem to be stemming from metabolic issues from hyperinsulinemia. I mean, it even shuts down autophagy. replacement of our older cells or the replacement of our older organelles, because your body can replace specific organelles within the cell, like your mitochondria, and recycle them into new, faster, better functioning mitochondria or organelles. And so we're seeing this in many metabolic issues, even in psychiatric issues such as schizophrenia or major depression, that they all have dysfunctioning of mitochondria. Even cancer, they all have dysfunctioning mitochondria. And so when you put people on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, which is a ketogenic diet, if you do it properly, then you're going to reduce your insulin, and all these different avenues of self-care are going to come back in order. You're going to go through autophagy and mitophagy, replacing your mitochondria. And after a couple of months, you're going to have 4 times as many mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. So this is a huge bonus. And people like Professor Chris Palmer from Harvard, who's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, wrote a book called Brain Energy. He's actually doing major clinical trials in humans with hundreds of patients and showing that a ketogenic diet can actually reverse schizophrenia, major depression, OCD, bipolar disorder, autism, ADHD, and so on and so forth. So having high insulin is bad, causes a lot of harm. Just specifically from a metabolic issue, it disrupts our normal functioning and production of energy, but it also obviously stays up because it has a long half-life. And so our blood sugar is up, but now it's going to be down. And our body's saying this is hazmat control, just get this stuff down. Insulin stays up. Now blood sugar is too low. Now you feel pretty rotten and you can't mobilize your energy. So we say, okay, well, I have to eat more. So this is why we have to eat more. We have to eat more. We have to eat more carbs, eat more. I got a carbo load. I got a carb up so I can get some energy. It's pretty backwards. We have energy on us. We should be able to use it. And so it causes you to overeat because your blood sugar is dropping. You can't replenish your blood sugar and your energy just normally, like you could otherwise if you weren't taking in carbohydrates and having your insulin up. But it does something more insidious as well, which it blocks a hormone called leptin, which is a satiety hormone, but it also is a master hormone for many, many, many other hormones and other functions in our body. We think of it as coming from our stretch receptors. This is why we're told in the 80s you should eat a bunch of fiber. You could burn fat because it's just going to fill up your stomach. It's going to release leptin, and you're going to think that you have all this food, and that's it. There's actually a lot of other receptors in your stomach that look for protein, look for fat, look for other nutrients that are not going to be satisfied just by those stretch receptors. So it's a bit sophomoric to just say, oh, you get the stretch receptor, you get the leptin, and then you'll be fine. So that didn't work. But that was the argument. But most of the leptin actually comes from your fat stores. And they go to your brain and tell your brain how much energy you have. It's like a running gas gauge. So insulin blocks that. So it blocks leptin. Now your brain can't see its leptin, can't see how much energy you have. So it thinks that you don't have any or you don't have enough. And then it sees your blood sugar dropping. So it gets a signal that you have zero energy reserves and your blood sugar is dropping. So it sends out a panic signal that says, if you don't eat now, you will die. And so it's this pathological starvation signal. That's it, because it thinks you're starving to death. And so you get this signal that you're starving to death. And this is why people get hangry, like 4 times a day. They're like, I have to eat. They get crazy. And you see this stuff on YouTube and TikTok and things like that. And someone just freaking out in the car, like, I have to eat. And everyone's laughing at them because it's like clearly they're not going to die. But they're so upset and they feel that is exactly what they're experiencing. And so it causes you to overeat. And so it can have, it's just sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're just eating something that's causing you to eat more of that something that's causing you to eat more of that something that's completely destroying your metabolism and so many of the inner workings in our body. And just getting rid of that stuff entirely is being seen to have more and more and more and more benefits.
Yeah, an example, which I'm not proud of, but I'm not like a full carnivore. I'm definitely animal based. I love meat from Brazil. Like barbecues are life there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we like to have some goldfish. By we, I mean my wife and I. And I notice every time I reach for the bag, like it's best to just not have this stuff at home. But when we do have it at home, and I grab some, man, that bag is unstoppable. Like I can't stop reaching in for it, and it's frustrating because I'm like, this thing is not filling me up, and I know it's happening, but I continue to eat, and then I just have to force myself to put it away, and I am no more fuller. I don't feel satiated at all, and I know that I'm still going to be hungry in like half an hour. So
Yeah.
it's if you see me smiling as you're describing these things, it's because I'm thinking of something I just did or did not too long ago. I'm like, yeah, I experienced that for sure.
Yeah. Well, and fructose. You said fructose specifically is one of the many carbohydrates that are available, but this works a bit differently in our body, and fructose actually independently will actually suppress leptin as well. And so when you're eating something, fructose doesn't ever come on its own in nature. It comes with glucose and other things, and it can also just raise insulin on its own. But it will raise insulin and it will block leptin. So they'll both block leptin. So it has this compounding effect. So if you're eating something sugary and carby, then you're really, really in for it, and you're really going to start overeating. And it also upregulates a hormone called ghrelin, which is the other side of that stretch receptor in your stomach. So when your stomach's full, it stretches out and releases leptin. When it's empty and not being stretched, it releases ghrelin. And so it has this balance. So as you have your ghrelins up, it's like, okay, stomach's empty, but got a lot of leptin, not a big deal. But now your leptin is going down and your ghrelin's really up here. And your brain's like, okay, we need to eat because we don't have any energy. We don't have enough energy stores, and we don't have anything in the pipeline. Nothing's coming down the track. And so that really, really, really gets that whole panic signal going again. And this is something that bariatric surgeons, when they do like gastric sleeves, they think that that's a major reason that this helps people lose weight is probably less to do with the physical restrictions of the stomach, but actually they cut out the part of the stomach that actually releases ghrelin. And so now you don't get that release of ghrelin, so you're only seeing the leptin, right? And so they think that that's actually probably one of the well, at least a factor in how that helps. So it sort of begs the question: why don't you just cut that little part off and leave the rest of it the hell alone? If that's not helping, because it can definitely harm as well. But fructose is interesting as well because this is the only carbohydrate that is actually metabolized by our liver in the same manner as alcohol, and actually broken down into the same byproducts as alcohol, which is a bit scary because those byproducts are exactly the same. And so a gram of fructose is going to turn into the same byproduct as a gram of ethanol. And so this is actually a big deal because we eat a lot more sugar than we drink alcohol. And some people say, well, you don't absorb all of it necessarily, especially if you eat fiber, which is true. And maybe some of that is converted into glucose before it gets to the liver. Possibly there's some studies that suggest that. However, whatever makes it to the liver is going to get processed in the same way and broken down in the same products as alcohol. And we eat a hell of a lot more sugar. Alcohol is self-limiting. You're just going to pass out, and
Yeah.
so you can't, you have to stop at a certain point physically. You're not going to be able to. I have, in a summer vacation when I was 12, eaten a 10-pound bag of gummy bears from Costco in 2 days. All right. Just playing video games.
Yeah.
They didn't even taste good. I didn't even want to eat them. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just couldn't stop. And so that's this addictive nature of these things. So you can just keep doing this. You can just keep doing this to yourself. So it's been shown that the breakdown products of fructose are the same as the breakdown products of ethanol. And those give the same damage to your body as those breakdown products from ethanol. So you get fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and it's even implicated in cancer and Alzheimer's and other sorts of neurodegenerative processes as well. So that's not good. And it also gives an addiction center, or it gives a dopamine signal to the addiction centers of our brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. And there are studies with MRIs showing that fructose kills the same areas of our brain as meth to the same extent as meth from this dopamine response, because dopamine is an excitatory molecule. It turns on your neurons. And little known fact, when neurons are firing, they're actually damaging themselves. And neurotransmitters are actually, the breakdown products of neurotransmitters are actually toxic to neurons, which is crazy. So they need to be degraded, they need to be broken down, they need to be recycled very quickly. And this is why they turn off, and they have to recycle and do a lot of different housekeeping things to sort of build things back up and restock these neurotransmitters and don't let them damage themselves more. This is why we need to sleep. This is why certain parts of our brain turn off and different parts are on and off at different times. When you
Very
turn them
briefly,
on,
can I
yeah,
interrupt here? Would that correlate? Is that like why if you do a lot of things that release dopamine, that eventually like the dopamine just doesn't become as effective because you're literally
mhm.
like damaging those neurotransmitters because there's so much release of it?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
part of it?
that's exactly right. Yeah, so it's an
Okay.
excitatory molecule, right? So it's turning it on, right? And so just like anything, which your body's going to sort of build up a resistance to things that are harmful, right? And so you're going to get
Yeah.
tolerance. So one of the ways that you can build that tolerance is it reduces the amount of dopamine receptors on these neurons. So you'll have this signal saying, "Hey, make this dopamine." It's like, look, we've done that. We can't do this too much anymore. We need to tamp this down, right? So that it's mitigating that. But then you say, well, I need more than I need more than. So you start upping the dose, upping the dose, upping the dose, right? So people drink more, they do more drugs, they eat more sugar to get the same effect that they are looking for. And eventually you can kill these things, right? Because the longer these neurons stay on, the more damage they get. Eventually, you can actually destroy them. You can kill them. And so that can be permanent. And so those areas of the brain, those neurons can actually die off. And you can do this, with any sort of dopamine, producing or stimulating drug. It's just going to keep sending that signal, and eventually that cell is going to die off. And so studies that looked at this, they gave, like you or I gave us, give someone like an amphetamine, and you just, like, Adderall or whatever, and, certain areas of your brain would just light up like a Christmas tree, right? On
Yeah.
functional MRI. And then you go and give that same dose to a meth addict, and it barely twinkles. But you give that same dose to a sugar addict, someone who's metabolically unhealthy, and it's the same barely twinkle, right? So it's
Dang.
it's actually causing serious damage to your brain and your body. So it's killing those areas of your brain like meth, and these addiction centers of your brain like meth. So now you're dopamine dependent. You have to take a drug to get any sort of dopamine response, and it's damaging your body like alcohol. So should well and truly be defined as a drug. It should be a controlled substance, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to criminalize it, get rid of it, but like, age restricted, absolutely. I think absolutely should
For
have age
sure.
restrict fructose because, especially in the developing brain, this is a big deal. It's a big problem. It's implicated in things like Alzheimer's, which, is causing degenerative process in adults to the extent that they are, invalids in some cases. What's that doing to a developing brain? What's that doing to a fetus? It's not going to be good.
Hmm. Yeah. And does that cross the, I guess, does it get into the breast milk? So if like the mom's like binging on gummy worms or something, is the
Hmm.
fructose going to the baby?
That's a good
You
question.
think?
Actually, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if it goes in, but depending on what the mom eats, it absolutely affects her breast milk. My
Yeah.
mom told me when I was a kid that, your body just scavenges everything it needs to just give that baby what it needs, but it actually doesn't. There are cases where, like specifically with vegans in the last couple of years, I've seen a number of cases in different countries, in the news where a vegan mother was breastfeeding and the child actually died from the breast milk. It didn't have enough
Oh,
nutrients, or it had too much toxins or oxalates or whatever it had. It was not compatible with life, and unfortunately, the baby died. And that's absolutely tragic. And so, if you think about it evolutionarily, it's not in the advantage to the species survival if an infant that's suckling survives, but the mother who's caring for it dies. It doesn't make
yeah.
sense, right? So what would make sense is the body keeps what it needs to survive, and if there's enough to give the baby in the milk, it will, right? And it will sap you. I mean,
Mm.
don't get me wrong. I mean, women breastfeeding, it takes a lot out of them. It's a high energy output system, but as far as vital nutrients that you will die without, it's not. It doesn't make biological sense to kill the mom and then have this suckling infant sitting there is just going to die of exposure in a couple of days anyway. You know,
Yeah.
so you know that's the thing. So if the mom's eating less nutritious things, the milk's not going to be as nutritious, and if she's eating things that are harmful, or even just low grade harmful, and gluten, things like that, that can absolutely go into the breast milk. and cause problems with the baby. Yeah.
Okay. So let's maybe very briefly, because there's so many questions, but like, would you, in a short couple sentences, would
Mhm.
you recommend, or would you say it's okay to eat some fruit,
Mhm.
and maybe even to maybe make it a little bit better? Is it easy? Is it better to eat some fruit in season? Some people argue that.
Well, I don't think I can do this in a couple sentences, but
Oh, all right, go for it.
yeah, look, you can. Yeah, it depends on what you're after, right? If you're after optimal health, where you want your body to work as well as it possibly can, then no, you shouldn't eat fruit. It's not the optimal
Okay.
food, and you shouldn't even eat chicken breast because chicken breast has a lot of protein, doesn't have any fat, it doesn't have all the nutrients you need. So you have fatty steak up here, you have chicken breast down here. Even though it's a net positive with the chicken breast, there's still this big disparity between your
Hmm.
optimal food, which is fatty red meat generally. And so, it depends. Like if you just want to enjoy some fruit every now and then, go for it. And the less you do, the better. If it's tree ripened, vine ripened, it's better. It will have less toxins in it. It's not, fruit. People think that means the plant wants you to eat the fruit. Not necessarily. It wants something to eat the fruit, not necessarily you, because it's evolved with other things, usually birds. A lot of fruits and berries. You go out in the woods, you just can't eat random berries off a bush. Most of them are still deadly. Most of them will still kill you. Most of these things are inedible, right? Because of the amount of toxins that are in them. But even in the edible ones, like avocado, which I mean, for all intents and purposes, is probably the least offensive fruit out there, right? If it's unripened, when you pick it, it has a lot more toxins in it because that seed is not ready yet. It's not ripe yet. And so it does not want anything disturbing it. That's why it's rock hard and it's stuck on that branch or that vine, right?
Right.
Tomatoes, green tomatoes have for centuries been said, those are poisonous. Don't eat green tomatoes. And then when I was a kid, probably a teenager, people, oh, well, that's just a wives' tale. It's not that bad, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, maybe like once in a while, sure. But you're eating green tomatoes all the time, it's going to catch up to you. There's a lot more solanine and a lot more of these defense chemicals in there because it doesn't want to be eaten yet. Even if it wants to be eaten eventually, it doesn't want to be eaten yet. And so,
Yeah.
just looking at oxalates in avocado, oxalates are a defense chemical that plants use to defend themselves. This is well established in the medical literature that this is damaging to humans above 150 to 200 milligrams a day. And we're eating spinach. A cup of spinach can have 700 milligrams of oxalates in it, and all the other crap that's in it too. So what was it, Hemsworth, the actor played Thor. He
Chris Hemsworth. Yep.
Chris Hemsworth. That's it. He went on this vegan kick, probably from Game Changers, nonsense that
Yeah.
came out. And he started going on all these green smoothies and whole food and all that sort of stuff. He was having these big spinach smoothies every morning, and he went to the hospital with oxalate poisoning. He had to get kidney surgery to remove massive
Oh
staghorn calci,
wow.
right? So these massive, massive, massive problems that you can cause from this. You get neurological damage. It's a neurotoxin. This is there in order to hurt you. It actually strips your body of magnesium and calcium and other nutrients and minerals. And so even though there's calcium in spinach, if you eat spinach, your calcium will go down. And that's been shown in clinical trials in humans and mice going back decades. And so, the oxalate level in avocados when they're unripe are like, it's something like 50 milligrams per 100 grams. But in ripened ones, it's less than a tenth of that, right? So, yes, in season, actually ripe makes a big difference, and not all fruits, right?
Right.
The cassowary bird is a tropical bird. They only eat fruit. They eat about 150 different fruits, tropical fruits. Every single one will kill you. Why is that? Because those seeds only germinate in the guts of a cassowary bird. They don't germinate anywhere else. And so if that seed does not go through a cassowary bird, it does not become a plant. And so it
Yeah.
is in that plant's best interest to make sure that the cassowary bird eats it and nothing else. And so, you know, you have to know which fruits to eat, and you have to, yes, absolutely eat them in season when they're ripe. Sweet fruits, things with fructose in them, seem to have less toxins. except for fructose
Okay.
itself, which is, I think, is a
Yeah.
long-term harm.
Which we
Um,
just talked about it.
yeah. And so, but if you people think that evolutionarily that fructose is the most sweet carbohydrate. Most carbs are very mildly sweet at best. Like milk, it's lactose in it, not very sweet. It's a bit sweet, and but fructose is very sweet. And so we think that that's because most of the things that have, but we don't know of anything that contains fructose. It also contains like harmful acute toxins that will kill us that day. But that doesn't mean that they're entirely safe. There are still a lot of different sorts of things in there. And also, again, is it right? Because it absolutely has things in it when it's not right. But even all citrus fruit has fructose in them that are UV sensitive. They react with light. They bind proteins and DNA and damage them permanently. You can even get second degree burns from getting lime juice on your hands in the sun. There's
Mm,
documented cases
yeah.
of that in the U.S. And and many different sorts of problems that you can get from this. This is why uh, you can't eat grapefruit or drink grapefruit juice with certain medications, because the enzymes that are in your liver that detoxify these fructose in grapefruit are the ones that metabolize certain medications like statins. And so you'll get a toxic level or nothing close to a therapeutic level if you eat them in conjunction with grapefruit. So yes, historically, if you're starving and it's in season and you're just like, hey, I haven't killed any, I haven't come across any mammoth recently, and here's an
Yeah.
apple tree, like, okay, it's probably your best friend. You load up on some apples, you eat those. Those are very different apples too. Little crab apples, mostly sour, don't really have much sugar in it. We bred these things to be much more sweet and have a much higher sugar content, to be much bigger.
Yeah.
So these aren't natural fruit anyway. They're not something our ancestors would have come across 50,000 years ago. And most of the time during all these different ice ages, most people were actually up in the tundra. They were up in the ice sheets hunting the megafauna, and there were no fruit trees. There were no beehives. So we don't have to have fruit clearly because there was none available during that time, and people obviously did very well. You don't just barely eke through an ice age. You either thrive or you go extinct. Those are the two options.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's go extinct. Even if you're mostly thriving, you still have a really good chance of going extinct. Those are not
Mhm.
not good environments.
Yeah, I like the example that you share of the ice age because there's definitely no plants. Also, the Inuits who live in the very
Mhm.
north who eat a lot of fat, a lot of blubber. Let's transition to going off of that. Let's transition to some doubts about like red meat. And one question that somebody might ask both of us during this conversation is like, isn't saturated fat bad for us? Because animal meat has a lot of saturated fat. And I guess off of that is just isn't fat in general bad for us?
Yeah, so that's been said for running on 40 years. That's been the accepted idea, and before that, it was a hotly contested contention. We've been eating saturated fat. We've been eating meat for literally millions of years. We've never had the diseases and the prevalence that we've seen them now. As heart disease was climbing up in the 20th century, as the prevalence of heart disease started climbing up, we were actually eating less and less saturated fat and less animal fat. What we were eating, replacing it with, was seed oils, and that actually perfectly tracks with a decade or so lead time the rise in cardiovascular disease, as well as sugar and high fructose corn syrup and the consumption of fructose. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the average American was eating 2 to 4 pounds of sugar per year. Now we're eating about 150 pounds a year, right? So
Wow.
about half a pound a
Yeah.
day, sort of thing, just a bit less. So massively different. And one of those massive differences is actually we're eating a lot less fat. We're eating a lot less saturated fat, and I think that that's actually been detrimental. So why would we be the only animal on Earth that gets heart disease and other problems from eating saturated fat? Right?
Yeah.
Almost every animal on Earth runs on mostly saturated fat, and then the rest of it is on protein. Except for like things that like drink nectar and things like that. Like everything else is basically getting fat and protein. Carnivores because they eat animals with fat, and they go for the fat first. That's the most important thing in the wild. But also herbivores because they actually don't break down fiber at all. They can't. No vertebrate animal can break down fiber. So they cultivate bacteria in their gut that eat the fiber, and as a byproduct, they produce short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. And so even a
Yeah.
gorilla that just eats green leaves, they get 70% of their calories from saturated fat. Cows get nearly 80% of their calories from saturated fat. And then the bacteria die off and they absorb those as protein. So they're getting 70% fat and 30% protein, but they're eating fiber, but what they're absorbing is fat and protein. So fat and protein is what makes the animal kingdom go round. And same with humans. We have the Inuit, we have the Maasai, we have all these different populations that are still to this day eating a very meat-centric, high-fat diet, if not exclusively meat, and they're extraordinarily healthy in a lot of ways. And people will try to mislead you and say, well, the Maasai, their average life expectancy is only 60, so obviously, that's not good. Well, first of all, they're not dying of heart disease. They're not dying of cancer. They're not dying of diabetes. They are fit, well, healthy. They don't even get arthritis. And they're also, basically living at a Stone Age nomad level, right?
Yeah.
They don't have all the modern hospitals and technologies that we have that significantly improve our ability to survive, especially through early childhood. Their infant mortality rate is high as hell because they don't have all the doctors and pediatricians and things like that checking them out. And also they live with lions and they fight them with sticks and they win. Right? These are badass people. They're very, very hale and hearty. And you should check us out on Instagram. There's an Instagram account with some of these guys from Maasai, the Maasai tribe called the Maasai Boys,
Mm.
Masai Boys. And there's one picture of the guy whose account it is, and he's drinking out of this river. It has this sort of gourd he's drinking out. The patch of water he gets it from is bright orange. I don't know what in God's name is in that, but it's completely opaque. It's completely
Right.
opaque. You cannot see through this at all. You don't know what monsters are underneath it. It is just mud, and he's just drinking this. And he's
Great.
like, yeah, like you guys probably aren't going to be doing well with this. You don't have the the immune system to deal with this, but we're fine with it. So they're drinking that. One of the main drivers of improved longevity and life expectancy as a population was the advent of potable water. They don't
Right.
necessarily have that. So,
Yeah.
it's
It's true.
pretty ridiculous to sort of compare those things. But again, they're not dying from heart disease. They're not dying from cancer. And so maybe their average
Hmm.
life expectancy is less than that because a lot of kids are dying, right? And so you have to have a lot of people living well over 100 if you have, half your population is dying as a child. That's going to be we're talking average here. So half die before 60, half die above 60. But if half are dying when they're kids, you have to get way over 60 to bring that average up as well. So, there's things like that, and you could sort of go on and on and on. But
Yeah. So I'll interrupt here just because I know for anybody who wants to continue to learn about this, you have a full podcast talking
mm,
just on saturated fat, which I learned a lot about. I mean, your podcast, you talk about everything we're discussing here and deeper. So for anybody that wants to dive deeper, for sure, check Dr. Chaffee's YouTube channel and podcast just to cover a little bit more. Can you briefly talk about the notion that red meat is linked to cancer? Because I know that's one fear, like colorectal cancer, but I believe the research there is more epidemiological. It's not
yeah.
really sustained.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the nutritional research that comes out is actually pushed through, funny enough, from a religious organization called the Seventh Day Adventist Church, who actually
Yeah,
started and founded the field of dietetics and nutritional sciences. I believe in 1917. This is actually Kellogg's cereal. He was a doctor and he was a Seventh Day Adventist. I think he was a congressman in the U.S. He was an extraordinarily influential scientist and thought leader in the early 1900s. And he was of the opinion, as was all of the people in Seventh day Adventist Church, that that meat was sinful because it made people more lustful. People who ate more meat were just more healthy. They had better hormones, and so their hormones are telling them go procreate. So they said, wow, it makes you lustful. It makes you want to have sex. Sex, lust is a sin. Therefore, meat is
Yeah.
a sin. And so they said, well, you should just eat. You should avoid eating meat on a religious basis because it's bad to eat meat because it's sinful to eat meat. That was an actual thing. People can look that up, and they still believe that. And so they founded the entire field of nutritional sciences, and they've been involved in it heavily ever since then. For a very in-depth look at this, people should look at the work of Belinda Fettke, Fettke, and she's gone a deep dive into this. They are still completely wrapped up in all this. So a lot of this nutritional research that we call it research, it's really just misinformation. It's purposefully used to misinform people and push them in their into their religious ideologies. Come out of Loma Linda Medical Center, which is a Seventh-day Adventist medical school and hospital in California. And so they do the Adventist studies, and that's oh my gosh, look, you study these Adventists, and they only eat plants or they eat very little meat, and wow, they have such better health outcomes. Oh, this must mean plants are great. Well, a biased study from the
Yeah.
get-go, but they look at this, and they were using the blue zone studies, for instance. They said, oh, look, they don't eat meat, therefore this is better. But what they don't tell you is that same population that has the exact same health benefits and longevity, life expectancy benefits as the Seventh-day Adventists are the American Mormons, who have no such dietary restrictions. But just like other religious sects, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't do drugs, they don't engage in dangerous behavior, and they have the exact same increased life expectancy, but they don't tell you about those sorts of things. So a lot of these things are biased in first and foremost. Um,
Yeah.
One of the ways that they bias these things is they look at they call meat whatever the hell they want to, right? So pizza sometimes has toppings that are meat, and so in a lot of these studies they include pizza as meat. They just call it meat, right? Or fast food. Do you eat fast food? How often do you eat fast food? And that has meat in it sometimes, therefore that's meat. They don't care that all the fries are deep fried in trans fats, which we know will cause heart disease. It's now illegal to do that in most countries. That the soda is just full of sugar, and all the bread and the processed carbs and the sugary sauces and all these things like that. No, it's all meat. So we know that is misleading on purpose, obviously. And so they count all these things means like, oh, they eat less of this stuff. Well, the people who and so they're comparing this against people who eat junk food, right? So oh, you're eating more whole fruits and vegetables, and you're eating less junk food, but that's considered meat. So you're eating less meat and more whole fruits and vegetables, therefore that's better. That's where that sleight of hand is. And the main reason that people think that that meat, especially red meat, is contributory to cancer is because of a WHO proclamation that said they found like an 18% increased association with processed meats and colorectal cancer, right? So any sort of epidemiological study, because there's so many confounding factors, because there's so many different things that get involved that could skew your answer. Like we've been told meat is going to kill you for 40 years. So people that are more likely to eat meat, they're more likely to smoke, drink, drive too fast, die in a car accident, die in extreme sports, things like that. There's more risk-seeking behavior. Apparently, eating a steak is risk-eating behavior. But again, they're also conflating fast food and pizza with meat as well. So
Yeah.
so there's all these confounding factors, and they only and even then they're saying there's an 18% increased correlation. In these epidemiological studies, you don't even look at it until it's like over 200% increased correlation, because it's just background noise at that point. You don't know what's going
Hmm.
on. It's not strong enough signal until it's like over 200%. So it's only an 18%, not too much. Um, and then also, that was very problematic because they purposefully omitted a number of studies, of better quality studies, well designed studies that showed that there was absolutely no correlation or even association with red meat or processed meat and cancer or disease outcomes in general. And they decided to exclude those. In fact, this was voted on by a panel at the WHO, and a lot of people actually dissented and say, "Hey, no, this is wrong. You should include these. This is the wrong decision. This isn't the. I don't think we should come to this conclusion and make these recommendations." And they were outvoted. And the people who voted for it, they actually were like, a lot of them were like, I think it was like something like 40% of them were like vegan, vegetarian, or Seventh Day Adventists, right? And
Man.
so the people who
Yeah.
dissented said, "Hey, you guys should declare your biases. You guys should declare your diet. This is what you eat." And they're like, "No, we're not going to do that." So this went through uh, as processed meat being carcinogen, and red meat being a probable carcinogen, right? So, and
Right.
people say, well, that's it now. They don't say that unless it's definitely 100% carcinogen. Well, that's not true. And if we're doing it by that measure, then Brussels sprouts should be out the door because there's 136 of them. But then
Yeah.
those same people will say, well, no, but it's probably not in the dosages. It's probably hormetic. It's probably not really,
Yeah.
it's just like, well, which one is it? I mean, do you believe the WHO when they classify something as carcinogenic, or don't you? And so they're cherry picking their decisions there, but that was a pretty bogus
Mhm.
decision in the first place. And there are a number
Yeah.
of studies that don't show any association. And importantly, there was a large study in literature review out of the University of Washington in Seattle last year that looked through hundreds of different papers, and they found that there were most of them said that there was no association between meat and cancer. And also, what's a processed meat? What are you processing it with? You're putting in sugar and spices. You're putting in plants. And so, if you're making it carcinogenic by processing it, it's the plants that are causing the problem, right?
That's funny.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so they found that there was the studies that did say that there was an association. They found there's very, very, very weak evidence, very, very weak associations, and they were quote lazy studies. They were lazy science. These are lazy studies. They're
Mhm.
sloppy. They're poorly put together, and I think intentionally so. And so they showed that there is no association between meat and cancer, especially with unprocessed red meat.
Yeah, and the way the WHO behaved in determining that or choosing that research really seems more religious than scientific, right? Like, how do you not
Mm,
include that? If you get a bunch of carnivores to do the same thing, like there's definitely going to be a little bit of rallying up the troops to not get that published.
yeah.
I appreciate you sharing the research behind that. If you want to add something to that, go ahead. But before, I'm just going to ask you to also just I listened to your podcast with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and
Mm,
he's really big into researching the metabolic impacts, or really, he says that cancer is a metabolic syndrome issue,
yeah.
right? Like, um, and one thing that I found very fascinating is that both, I believe it was him and you shared a case study of a patient with glioblastoma that benefited from a carnivore diet and was able to, is still alive, I think, after many years. And I
Mm,
know that for those that don't know, glioblastoma on the best side of things, people may live up to like 12, 14 months.
mhm.
But on the carnivore diet, it seems like these two case studies, these patients were able to live a lot longer. Um, Again, just briefly, could you share a little bit about the pros there of carnivore diet for helping cancer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it comes back to the fundamental idea that this is how we're designed biologically. And when you just give your body what it needs to function to its genetic potential, yet you're actually going to meet your optimal, your optimal health. And and cancer is included in that. Cancer, I've studied, I started eating meat because I took cancer biology and studied cancer biology and studied how this works in the body. And coming here, later and speaking to Thomas Seyfried, who is one of the major cancer experts in the world. He has over 150 peer-reviewed publications in cancer biology and human and animal models. And we know from the work of Dr. Otto Warburg, who is a Nobel Prize winner in medicine. 90 years ago, he got the Nobel Prize, and he did another 30, 40, 50 years of research into mitochondria and cancer. He wrote a seminal paper called The Origins of Cancer in 1951, and he goes over how this is really a mitochondrial metabolic disease where the mitochondria are dysfunctioning to the point that they can't go through oxidative phosphorylation, and so they have to go through alternate means of producing ATP, which is energy for the cell. And By doing that, you create a lot of free radicals, which are going to cause a lot of genetic mutations, which are going to cause a lot of damage to the cells, going to cause a lot of damage further to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are extraordinarily important. They have a number of different epigenetic effects. They also have a lot of genes in themselves as well. They are also, when we think about cancer, what is cancer? It's unregulated cell growth. So the cells are just dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing, and they just go crazy, right? It's supposed to stop. Your body's supposed to be very controlled in that. And so cancer is uncontrolled, unfettered growth and replication. Well, it's the mitochondria that actually are the kill switch for that. They're the ones that mitigate that. So if they're healthy, they'll just be like, nope, it's not time yet. We're not going to do it. We're not going to divide. And then when they say, okay, they step away, they release that negative control on it, then the cell is allowed to divide. So if the mitochondria are damaged beyond repair and they can't fulfill that function, then you just get unregulated cell growth because you don't have anything stopping them, right? Also, one of the hallmarks of cancer is that they can't go through programmed cell death, apoptosis. They can say something's wrong, we just need to shut off and die. The mitochondria are what action apoptosis. So when they're damaged, they can't shut the cell off either. So this all leads to a big problem. Another reason why this looks more like cancer is a metabolic mitochondrial issue as opposed to the somatic theory of cancer, which is that it's purely genetic, is, well, first of all, that when you look in a tumor, the different cells, they have actually different genes. They're not monoclonal. So it's not just this cancer cell and that cancer cell is just going gangbusters. They all have different genes. Some of them have the genetic markers, some of them don't. Some have normal genetics. And there's some cancers that have no genetic abnormalities at all, right? And that's very strange if you believe that this is purely genetic. Another clear example of how this is not purely genetic, but driven by the mitochondria, is that when you take the nucleus of a cancer cell with all these genetic changes and you put it into a cell with normal mitochondria, it does not behave as cancer. You can even clone mice and frogs and things from it, which they've done.
Oh, wow. That's really neat.
But if you take the damaged mitochondria out of a cancer cell and you put it into a normal cell with normal DNA, it does behave as cancer. You can't clone it, it just dies, right? And furthermore, if you take healthy mitochondria and you put it into a cancer cell, it suppresses the cancer. So that's basically QED as far as I'm concerned, that this is the mitochondrial issue. And so if you are addressing things in the wrong way, if you're saying this is a genetic issue, we need to address the genetics, well, you're going to have some success because there are some genetic hallmarks to different cancers and how they behave and all that sort of stuff. Great. But you're going to have middling results, which is what we have with cancer. And we've spent untold billions of dollars, probably trillions at this point, in our research and treatment of cancer throughout the world. And we've made improvements, but we haven't made as much as you would have thought for the amount of effort that we've put into it. And I think that's because we're barking up the wrong tree. And when you realize that because of these, all cancer cells, whether they have genetic changes or not, they all have damaged mitochondria, all of them, right? They all go through substrate level fermentation as opposed to oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria, because mitochondria can't function. So as Otto Warburg showed, he argued in 1951 that cancer was a metabolic issue of the mitochondria. And then Maasai and Kikuyu came out with the double helix and said, oh, DNA. And everyone's like, that's it. Everything's DNA. Forget everything else. And, DNA is very important. But the mitochondria are actually the workers. They're almost like the sailors on a ship, and they're running around, or like architects at a firm. And they're actually out there building and running, big structure. And they're using the blueprints, which are the DNA. The DNA is not doing it. The blueprints aren't doing it. They're just being used by the workers, the mitochondria, to run the development of the whatever the hell. So I think that's more likely what it is. So that got completely just sidelined. But he showed back then, and we've known this today. This has been reconfirmed in recent. Reproduced in recent studies with Seyfried and others, that This is all going on. All this stuff is reproducible. All this stuff is able to be shown that Walter Warburg showed back in 1951 and before. And also that because these mitochondria are damaged, they can't generate ATP properly, that they need about 400 times the amount of blood sugar and glucose to operate and hit their metabolic demands than normal cells do. And they cannot run on ketones. They don't have the ability to, because their mitochondria are destroyed, they're defunct, they're not usable. And so when you go into a ketogenic diet of any form, which a carnivore diet is, unless you're eating fruit and honey, which I don't think you should, especially if you suffer from cancer, because that's feeding the cancer, that you are going to starve out the energy supply for these cells, and they'll die off. So you make blood sugar, you make glucose, and so it's going to be fed to a certain extent. But when you eat carbohydrates, your insulin or your blood sugar spikes up, and it gets a big dose of that, and when it runs, and if you're just eating carbs, just snacking and eating all the time, you're just pouring jet fuel onto this thing, and it's just going to grow. Whereas if you just have normal blood sugar, or even slightly lower blood sugar, but your ketones are up, you're going to be fine. But the cancer cell is going to stagger. I mean, you know this. When you're looking for cancer, you do a PET CT. You do FDG PET. This is what do? We put markers on glucose, and we give that injection, and we look for raised metabolic activity, which is what cancers are, right? So you go
they
in
light up like a Christmas tree.
Light up like a Christmas tree, and that's what, right? Because they need way more glucose, and so you give you give yourself a bolus of glucose, goes right in that cancer. That cancer just starts revving up, right? So that's the last thing you want to do. Right?
Yeah.
And so on a carnivore diet, you will stop that. You will reduce and limit the amount of glucose available. There's still going to be some, you're going to make some, but it's going to be much less available, and your immune system is going to be better, your body's going to be stronger, you're going to be able to fight it off better. I guess further evidence of the benefits of this, there was actually 2 studies that came out in 2019, 2020, and one was looking at chemo and ketogenesis, and one was looking at radiation. And they both found that when on a ketogenic diet, chemo and radiation were more effective in fighting the cancer and less harmful to native cells. So it was more specific to damaging what you wanted to damage and protective against the things that you didn't want damaged. And so that's massive. So even if you weren't getting this bonus of starving out the cancer, you're making chemo and radiation more effective as well. And that's massive. So some cancers run predominantly on glucose, and some run more so on glutamine. So most of them will run on a combination of glucose and glutamine. GBM runs on about 75% glutamine, right? And so it gets ATP from that. And glutamine is it's very common. It's really the most common amino acid in our body. We make it. It's like glucose. We make glutamine. It's also in all the proteins that we're eating. And so, but even then, when you're on a ketogenic diet and you still have this glutamine around, this still will suppress these cancer cells as well. So there are a couple of case studies with very long-lived people with GBMs who have used a ketogenic diet. Usually they transition into a carnivore diet. There's a gentleman, Andrew Scarborough, I've had on my podcast. He's a 10-year survivor of GBM. He's been doing very strict carnivore diet for most of that time. He's worked closely with Professor Seyfried, and he's actually had subsequent MRIs. He actually had a debulking. They didn't get all of it because part of it was in the motor strip, so they couldn't get all of it out because it would have crippled him. And so then they found that this was like the most aggressive type of GBM. So GBM, if without treatment, has a 3-month survival without treatment. With full treatment, it's about 15 to 18 months. With full resection, chemo, and radiation, right? So you extend life. We don't consider this a curable cancer, a curable disease.
Yeah.
He got that cancer. He got the diagnosis, and he found that, hey, chemo and radiation aren't going to work for me anyway. Why put myself through that? So he went and looking for alternative means and came across keto and carnivore and started doing that. And he's He's still alive. 10 years later, he's got advanced degrees. He's in medical school now. He's written a book on
Wow.
gadolinium and how we probably shouldn't use it in MRIs, and um, and now he's doing human trials in a ketogenic diet in Charing Cross Hospital in London, and so he's
That's
starting that
amazing.
out, and he's fully there. He's not having seizures. He's not on medication. He's come off of all that. There's another guy, Pablo Kelly, who Seyfried actually published his case report, and he's been alive for about the same amount of time. He's got 2 kids and a wife, and he's and he's living a very good life. And at the moment, it looks like he sort of goes on and off his strictness, and his cancer sort of starts growing when he stops being as strict, and then he starts going, oh, shouldn't do that, and he sort of comes back to it, and had a second debulking as well. But at first, he couldn't even get surgery. He had a biopsy to tell him what it was, and then he started going on the dietary thing, started doing keto, started doing carnivore, and it shrunk it down to the point where it was small enough that they could actually operate and sort of debulk it
Okay.
as
Good.
well. So it was very effective. These are not the only 2 case studies. There are dozens of case studies with GBM specifically around the world. There are entire case series out of different hospitals, such as Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. They published case series with like 15 or 20 patients using a ketogenic. It's called ketogenic metabolic therapy, where you target that metabolic biochemical pathway specific to these cancers, and they can actually use things that target as pharmacological treatment targeting glutamine, but it's not licensed for humans yet. So you're still trying to get those sort of passed. But in animal models, if you give a ketogenic diet and that glutamine inhibitor called DON, it it actually eradicates GBMs. And in animal models that Seyfried done, they had 4 groups. One was just a chow group, and they just ate, whatever normal feed that they give mice in the lab. And one group was a calorie restricted ketogenic diet. They lived about twice as long. And then the group that was given Dawn actually lived another week longer than the ketogenic group, right? Because, which makes sense, because it's,
Yep.
75% of its energy comes from glutamine. So it's probably going to be more effective to target glutamine. Then the group that they targeted both, they did ketogenic metabolic therapy and the Dawn stuff. None of the animals died. So
No
they
way.
all recovered. Yeah. And so you look at their MRIs, and it's actually shrink, 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 shrink. Most of them actually disappeared. They couldn't see them on imaging. Some of them had just a little bit left. And then they sacrificed the animals at the end of the study at about 40 days. All the other animals were dead for weeks at that point. And
Yeah.
and then they looked at their brain on autopsy, and most of them was just clumps of dead cells. They're just gone,
It's
because
amazing.
it's just completely targeted. So hopefully we get that, get something going in humans. Like Dawn was actually used in, I think, leukemia or lymphoma cases, but for some reason they're not letting people use it in for other cancers and GBM in particular, which is really frustrating. Hopefully we can get there.
Yeah.
But there are probably about 2 dozen human trials for GBM specifically and ketogenic metabolic therapy. Different kinds of keto have different results. So people say, hey, you can have less than 50 grams of carbs a day. Do worse than people say you cannot eat any grams of carbs per day. And what
Mm.
Thomas Seyfried says is you need to look at your GKI, your glucose ketone index. So how high your ketones are, how low your glucose is, and there's a formula to figure that out. People can look up from his work that you get that sort of around 2 or below 2 or close to 1. Those people seem to have the best effect and the best
Okay.
outcomes. And so in those studies where people were getting their GKI down, or the case studies that people were able to track their GKI and keep that down below 2, they just lived and lived and lived and lived and lived. And then in a number of these cases, they sort of slipped off of that. All of a sudden, their GKI started coming up. Cancer came back, and they died. And in a number of cases, actually, some of these people live 9 years, 10 years, and then they actually ended up getting radiation and died of radiation necrosis, which is really sad.
Wow. Yeah.
And actually, just a friend of mine just passed away from GBM. She started doing the different, dietary methods 6 years ago. I talked to her. I said, "Hey, this is something I think you should look into." And she survived 5 years. She had no sign of cancer on her MRI, none, right? And
Yeah.
then she started saying, "Hey, this is great. Everything's good." She started getting more lax with the diet. All of a sudden, it came back, and you could see because it was always there. It was just being
Yeah.
suppressed, and then it all of a sudden, came back because it was being fueled more. And she started going back really strong on the diet. She was doing really well with that, but her doctor said, "Hey, you need to do a radiation." And so she did that, and she just did not go well with her. So I don't know what her grades had been at that point, how much radiation she had had, but I know she probably had a few, at least probably like two courses before that. So I don't know if that was just too much for her. But I mean, within days she was feeling way worse on the radiation. After sort of a week, she was getting worse and worse, and then she had to check into hospice care. So she actually succumbed to the radiation,
Oh, jeez.
unfortunately,
Sorry to
which is
hear
really
that.
sad. Seyfried is actually quite against that sort of stuff because it can be quite harmful, you know.
There's harm,
But
yeah.
there are a number of different studies coming out. I'm actually trying to get a study here going. There's actually randomized controlled trials with ketogenic metabolic therapy and GBM in humans, and smaller studies, 20 people, but it's showing benefit in longevity and survival. And the case series that Cedars-Sinai has published, everyone who stayed on the diet is still alive
Okay.
at the time of the publishing of that. And some of these people, like around a decade or so. And then the people
Yeah.
that sort of said, for whatever reason, like, I can't do this, my lifestyle, I can't stay keto doing this. I don't want to do it. They died within the year, you know? So it's,
It's life or
I think
death for some
it is, and I think this is one of those things that I think this is really the tip of the iceberg as far as, as far as what we're going to find out
Yeah.
with cancer therapies. And there are a number of studies in humans in other cancers like triple negative breast cancer that shows clear improvement to survival with a ketogenic metabolic therapy, ketogenic diet. And it makes sense, if you understand cancer biology and you understand how these cells work, it should be a no-brainer that this stuff works. And in human trials again and again and again, it does work.
Yeah. Transitioning back to kind of focusing on plants. I appreciate you sharing amazing information there on the cancer side of things. Very helpful. A lot of things to think about and dive into. One question I had specifically around plants. I know you talked about the plant defense mechanisms. So we covered some oxalates, some chemicals in citrus fruits, the carcinogens. Another question I had in the future, but I don't think we'll cover, is like even coffee has oxalates and some other things, and you didn't react well to coffee, made you feel stiff after working out, and so you just cut it out after like 2 days or something. So we covered that. No need to dive deeper. People can listen to your podcast for more. But I came across Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who is a PhD, and some of the other people who are proponents of both meat and vegetables. They like meat, but they just want to include vegetables. Often mention broccoli being this superfood. And Dr. Rhonda Patrick, she had like a lecture, like a hours long lecture on specifically broccoli and sulforaphane. And a couple of things that I wrote down that she said, just so I want to hear your perspective on it, because I have difficulty balancing, do I go with the carnivore group, or do I also include the veggies, or do I include like the fruits? Because as a med student, I'm learning, I want to gather a little bit about everything and see what's most optimal.
Totally.
So a couple of things she mentions about the benefits of sulforaphane and broccoli is that it decreases prostate, bladder, breast, and lung cancer risk. It has reduction in all-cause mortality. A broccoli sprout drink increases benzene excretion by 61%. Cruciferous vegetables decrease heart mortality and positive effects on neurocognitive disorders, and so on. And so it's hard to balance the information that we get. one thing that I hear is that maybe the reasons why there's these benefits is because you're doing these tests on an averagely sick population, right? So if you cut out all the processed seed oils and the carbohydrates, and then you introduce broccoli to like a pure carnivore, maybe we would see something different. Like, what are your thoughts about approaching information like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's you raise a good point. You know, it's compared to what? That's always the question to ask. Well, compared to what? Well, this improves longevity. This improves X, Y, and Z, as compared to what? Right? Because you have to have the base with which to compare that against. It gets better. Okay, better from where? Right? What's your starting point? The starting point is the average American who is metabolically sick. 9% of Americans have at least one metabolic illness, right? 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. And most of the rest of the world is close behind. Actually, some are past that. America is not the most overweight or obese country in the world. We're like 20th, right? So that, yeah, as you make you think about it, right? So there are much, much worse countries out there. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, well, you're including broccoli, and that improves things from the standard deviation, right? So, but that's not a great baseline. I mean, those people are sick, they're unhealthy, they're unwell. I mean, anything's going to improve it. First of all, broccoli did not exist all that long ago. That is a manufactured, man-made plant. So we can't say that that's something we evolved on. I can't say that's something that's necessary to life because it didn't exist when we were evolving biologically, right? So that's first and foremost. Also, we're not comparing this to whole food plant-based diet. Against or a whole food plant-based
Right.
diet, or even just adding broccoli in with a whole food meat-based diet, right? And so there has been that study. It's only one. It was done in 1930. It was with the Maasai in Africa and the Kikuyu, who were a neighboring tribe, and they intermarried, so they're genetically similar. Kikuyu were mostly plant-based, whole food plant-based, no big chemicals and nonsense being run on it, and the Maasai eating mostly meat, milk, and blood. And they found the Maasai were on average 5 inches taller, 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass, and 50% stronger. The Kikuyu had bone deformities, teeth deformities, dental caries, chest infections, tropical ulcers, all sorts of different infections and problems, and a bunch of mineral and vitamin deficiencies. And so, we just see right there, okay, compared to what? Compared to a whole food plant-based diet, whole food meat-based diet wins every time.
Sure.
Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe add in broccoli to the Kikuyu. I don't know. Maybe that'll be better than the stuff that they're eating. You add it to the Maasai, it's probably going to get worse. So that's important. Then the quality of their evidence is very important as well. What are they basing this on? Again, a lot of these things will have to be epidemiological, but there's not going to be any randomized controlled trial just adding in broccoli and looking at cancer rates, all-cause mortality 20 years down the track. That study doesn't exist to my knowledge. And again, it would be compared to the standard nonsense diet.
Yeah.
But sulforaphane, I mean, they're saying this is a big superfood. You find one chemical in something that's like good, or you think is good, and you're saying it's a superfood. What else does it come with? Right? It's coming with oxalates. It's coming with tannins and lectins and all these other sorts of things, amphitic acid that are going to bind and strip nutrients out of your body, making it impossible for you to absorb nutrients, kind of block protease and lipase. You can't even break down the food that you've eaten, and you have to excrete it. All these sorts of different things that get in the way. Sulforaphane as well is a bit funny too, because a lot of people are actually showing this is actually quite toxic. It's saying as well, it causes you to release all these different factors that are anti-inflammatory and so great for you. Why are they releasing those things? They're releasing them in response to sulforaphane to clear the sulforaphane to get it the hell out of you, right? And so is that
Is that
causing?
is that what they would call hormesis?
So you could argue that. You could argue that that was causing that anti-inflammatory effect to clear this stuff out, and that had then a knock-on effect, and maybe at a certain level, right? But you could overwhelm your system's capacity, to deal with this, and that could be harmful. But But at the same time, is it hormetic? Is any of that actually overflowing? Or we're just looking at this and saying, well, that's an anti-inflammatory, that's good for you, and looking no further, because we do that sometimes. And we did that with
Yeah.
cholesterol. We said cholesterol is bad, which it's not. And we said, okay, this drug lowers cholesterol, therefore it's good. And didn't look at outcomes further than that. Didn't look at, does this actually decrease cardiovascular disease?
Right.
Does this increase stroke rate? Does this increase heart disease or heart attack rate? And they found that actually more recently, since 2015, they've done big studies with like 60,000 plus people over the age of 65. They actually found that no, it actually doesn't decrease heart attacks and strokes. And actually, it might look that it's actually increasing them,
Mm.
So, it's not just like, well, this does this effect and we want that effect, therefore it's good. Okay, what else happens? What happens next, right? So
Yeah.
it's causing a response for your body to clear the sulforaphane, and we think that chemical is good, that response is good, but is it? We don't
Yeah.
necessarily know that, but it would be if it was a net benefit, that would be a hormetic effect. But is it a hormetic effect in the whole? With everything else in total, all the other things that you brought to bear. And I'm not saying that, broccoli is the worst thing ever. I'm just saying that these things, the water is much more muddy than people make it out to be. And just because it
Yeah.
has one chemical that's maybe good for you, maybe it has this hormetic effect, but any chemical that's hormetic, it has a dose that's hormetic, and then after that it's toxic. So where's the stopping line there? They don't tell you that. They don't say like, hey, broccoli's good until this point, and then you need to stop, right?
Hmm.
So, it's just something to think about, that these things aren't necessarily all they're cracked up to be.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And yeah, often you have to eat like 4 to 5, 6 cups of broccoli, and I'm like, I can't even eat 1 cup. If I were to measure that out, that's crazy.
So
And then there's the fiber perspective.
yeah, well, I was just going to say with sulforaphane is actually toxic to the plant itself. Like this is a known toxin, right? So
Mhm.
sulforaphane is actually sequestered in different components. So it's like one of those like little glow stick sort of things that you crack it and
Yeah,
the two
yeah.
chemicals glow, go together, has this chemical reaction, right? So the the plant, the broccoli, and other plants that have this actually sequester the two constituents in separate parts. And when somebody starts chewing it, starts crushing it, there's a crush response that actually releases them, and they bind together to make sulforaphane, which is completely toxic to the plant and to
Okay.
others. And so that is clearly a defense mechanism. That's clearly a
Yeah.
chemical that's being released as a defense, right? And so you bite into this, you start chewing it, and all of a sudden it's releasing sulforaphane, right? That's normally toxic to the plant. It's toxic to you too. They
Yeah.
do this with different cytogenic glycosides that exist in 2,500 different plants that we know about, including almonds. And like the pit of a peach, you crack that open, inside it looks like sort of like shrivels of almond. That's called a bitter almond. And I'm just like, it's crazy enough. This is what they can use in like baking. They can get like uh, um, a concentrated sort of almondy flavor and make like marzipan
Hmm.
and things like that. That's because there's a ton of cyanide in there. Like one or two of those can kill you. Now, if you swallow that whole, not going to do much. Not going to do anything for you either. But if you chew it, then it releases these, different chemicals that then combine and react to then release cyanide. And that again
Yeah.
is this defense mechanism that they're using. So, these plants, we're not in the Garden of Eden. God did not
Yeah.
put these here for us to, just live on.
It's
I mean,
true.
these things, created these chemicals millions of years before we existed. They're going to be here millions of years after we're gone. And, they didn't make them millions of years ago because it's someday some, little, humans are going to be eating this and just, oh, I just love them so much. I just want to, increase their, anti-inflammatory drive. Like they made this to defend themselves, and they're trying to defend themselves. They're trying to be toxic to animals that eat them. That is their nature. That's how they survive. And again, broccoli didn't exist. We have
Yeah.
cultivated this, and in different sort of aggressive sort of agricultural cultivation to make this thing. So either way you look at it, this didn't exist when we were coming around. It's not something we need. And I try to just keep it simple and just like, what do we evolve on? What is our biology? Do we need sulforaphane? Is that something that's essential to us? No, it is
Mhm.
absolutely not. And so, thank you, I can do without.
Yeah.
Whether or not there's a hormetic dose, I really don't care.
Mhm. Yeah. And briefly, just because every time broccoli gets mentioned, I see these graphics online of like broccoli, cauliflower, and some other plants all kind of were grown from the mustard seed or mustard plant. I think that's the one. And I have being a Christian and having that background, I always think about the parable that Jesus gives about the mustard seed being the smallest of the seeds and it being like the kingdom of God is like this mustard seed, but it's going to grow and like nothing can stop it type of thing. And I'm like, that's ironic because physically the mustard seed continues to kind of grow. And a lot of people are eating things from that very, I suppose, that very seed and plant. Uh,
Yeah.
it's,
Well, it was funny, just as a sort of an aside, it just reminded me, but there's a lot of people that think that actually wheat are it's the dominant species on Earth because they've actually like cultivated and enslaved humanity to like grow and replicate and produce them and just make them breed and breed and breed and just make just trillions and trillions and trillions of these things. And then we're just a slave to them to like keep producing them and reproducing them and reproducing them and replanting them. And it's sort of
yeah.
funny to think about. Uh, but you could think about it that way, that we are working to, perpetuate this species that is definitely at an advantage for us having done that. They're just getting generation after generation after generation after generation, which is sort of the meaning of life. That's what life wants to do is make more life.
Hmm. I want to move on to talking a little bit about biomarkers. A lot of people are getting into kind of optimizing their health, and young doctors like me are interested in learning more about the biomarkers that I can look for to help in optimizing patients' health. What are some of the biomarkers that you look at for patients? And you can just mention them. I think we won't be able to cover exactly why we look into each biomarker, the importance. And then briefly, out of those biomarkers, I am interested in hearing your opinion on the triglyceride to HDL ratio, if you look at it, because I've asked many family doctors, endocrinologists, and cardiologists, and none of them know what that is. They don't know the significance of it. So I ask to see if they know. And then if they do, then I'd have a conversation. If not, I don't engage.
Mhm.
Um, so I'd love to hear your explanation on significance of that biomarker as well.
Yeah, so most of the work I do is in neurosurgery. So we're looking for very specific things in
Yeah.
that field. But when I'm in doing my preventative medicine, metabolic health, functional medicine, whatever you want to call it, practice, we look at a number of different things. Obviously, we look for very tailored blood tests when we're looking for something specific. But when someone's just sort of generally unwell and want to get a baseline for their health, we look at a number of different hormones. Vitamins, minerals. B12 is obviously very important. Most people are deficient in this, and because most people are eating plants, and the B12
Hmm.
does not exist in plants, and we're avoiding red meat because we're told that that's the worst one, but that's where most of this is. And so our reference ranges are way out of whack for B12 as well, which is kind of funny. So the sort of the reference range is sort of like 130 to 160 something in the US and Australia and Canada as well. And that's considered normal, but that's a reference range of the population, and so that's just the average population dose or level. But under 400, you can actually get neurological damage. You can actually get demyelination of your axons below 400, and so you can have a 300, and your doctor says, "Yeah, your B12 is fine." He's like, "Oh, I'm just tired. I'm not really blah blah blah." Like, okay, well, let's check your B12. Oh, well, that's normal, so we don't need to supplement.
Uh,
Wrong. Below 400 is a deficiency, and you can get neurological impairment. You can actually get it before that, but there's a lot of studies that show that that's when you start getting this. So a better marker is between 800 and 1200. So that's something that's also important. So when we look at biomarkers or any bloods, we look at different reference ranges. So we don't look at the average of the population. This is why there's different reference ranges for different labs, because first 2,000 people that come in that year, that's the reference range, right? That's normal, right? Well, again, 90% of people are metabolically sick. 70% of people are overweight or obese. So that's not a range I want to be in. So what we look at is we look at a range of people who are 25, men and women, who are, because things are different for men and women, who are healthy. They don't have any health issues. Those are very different ranges that you get. And so that in B12, you get sort of 800 to 1200.
Okay.
So we look at that. We'll look at B12. We'll look at magnesium and calcium, and also zinc. These are very important markers as well. Again, these are different ranges that we look at. Also, you can look at erythrocyte, zinc, and magnesium, and even folate. It's just a bit more accurate. We're actually looking in the cell. Same with thyroid function tests. You look at the thyroid, but the serum thyroid levels and the TSH don't necessarily tell you how bioactive they are in the cell, because that's where they're active, is in the cell, not in the serum. So you look at something called a reverse T3, and that can give you an indicator of how active it is in the cell, right? So if that's elevated, if your TSH and everything else is sort of okay, that can be indicative that you're not getting the effects from a thyroid hormone that you want. And then specifically with the HDL and triglycerides, the only thing I look at in cholesterol is HDL triglycerides. I ignore LDL because it's not useful, because there are over 100 different particulates of LDL, and you don't know from the number what they are. You have to do very specific studies. They're very expensive. But a better way of looking at that is what you said, the HDL to triglyceride ratio. And if your HDL is up and your triglycerides are down, you are more likely to have a pattern A, healthy, good, large, buoyant LDL cholesterol, which is what your body makes and uses and needs. And if you have that skewed and your HDL is low and your triglycerides are high, then you're more likely to have a pattern B, the small, dense LDL, the damaged, glycated ones, because that's what happens when you have high blood sugar. You get glycation of the LDL as well, and it damages them, turns them into the SDLDL. It takes off the ApoB100 receptor, which is what your liver looks at to suck these things up and utilize them. Now they can't do that, so your macrophages have to suck them up, and they turn into big foam cells, which we are thinking, get into your cell wall or arterial walls and form plaques. That's up for debate as well. Some people think it's more of a clotting mechanism. It has nothing to do with foam cells or cholesterol in the first place. But that aside, you won't have those foam cells if you don't damage the LDL in the first place. So if your HDL is high, it just in the normal ranges, and the triglycerides are in the normal ranges, you're doing pretty well. The higher HDL goes in comparison to your triglycerides, the better. So if they're sort of 1-to-1, then you're in really good shape. You're healthy, and you're much more likely to have healthy LDL cholesterol and your body be metabolically healthy in general. As that goes up, you're getting better and better. So me, on a high-fat carnivore diet, after 2 years, I checked my cholesterol, and I've never again since, because I don't care. It was 3-to-1. My HDL was 3 times higher than my triglycerides, which if you ask anyone who knows about this, it's like next to no chance of cardiovascular disease.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And so your ratio, do you do the triglyceride over HDL or HDL over triglyceride?
So that one I was referring to, HDL over triglycerides, was 3-to-1.
Okay. So you'd have a high ratio. Yeah. Because I know ideally for like men, you want the ratio of TG over HDL, like 1 or less. And then I think women's like 1.1 from another doctor that I talked to. But definitely the lower that ratio, the triglyceride over HDL, the better. And I rarely ever seen HDL that high in the patients that I've followed in family medicine clinic, endocrinology, like just throughout my rotations. And I find it interesting that you mentioned you could take a look at the reverse T3, because I asked a fellow in endocrinology, I'm like, do we ever check reverse T3? And he's like, never. Like, as a family doctor, you never touch it. He's like, there's no use in that. I was like, okay. I just kind of left it at that, but it's nice learning from you that that is kind of an indicator for the activity or the active form of the thyroid hormone inside the cell. So there's so much more that I have to learn.
Yeah. Well, so here's the distinction, right? So endocrinologists, you either have too much cortisol and you have Cushing's, or you have none at all and you have Addison's. Everything in the middle is normal to them, right? Unless you have a clear named disease and disorder, they don't want to know about it. They just be like, it's sort of going that way, but it's not quite there. So, come back when you're normal, when you're really bad. And so, it's, obviously, there's a lot of you're going to miss a lot of disease, and you're going to miss you're going to have a lot of people that are very unhappy and unhealthy, in those ranges. So, yeah, I mean, they're looking for just profound thyroid dysfunction in one way or the other.
Yeah.
They've got Graves' disease, their numbers are through the roof, or they've got, complete, failure and Hashimoto, just, serious Hashimoto's in there, and they're really, really defunct thyroid function. That's sort of what they're looking for. But Hashimoto's is very underdiagnosed. A lot more people have it than you would realize. We diagnose a lot of people with Hashimoto's by their antibodies. They have the specific antibodies, thyroid antibodies, that we look for in Hashimoto's. But they're just like, they don't feel great. They're having difficulty losing weight. They're, this, that, and the other, all these different problems. We check their thyroid. Yeah, okay, so it's low normal. TSH isn't really all that high. Maybe it's like 2.5. It's like, all right, what's your reverse T3? Way up there. Okay, so this isn't working either. Maybe there's something else going on. Look at their antibodies. Oh, what do you know? They actually have high antibodies for Hashimoto's. So, you can actually pick these things up more subtly.
Okay.
When they're before they've caused serious organ failure. And so that's what we try to do. We try to get people before they're fit for the hospitalization. We want to get people well. We want to keep them well. We don't want them on medication. We want them off medication. We want to head these things off before that. I think that sort of leads into other markers that you look at. You really sort of the running theme here has been metabolic health, right? And so one of the main markers of that would be things like your fasting insulin, fasting glucose, and your HbA1c. If you are metabolically healthy and your insulin is low and normal, and your body's functioning properly, you are more likely to be healthy in other ways as well. Your mitochondria are more likely to be functioning and better able to run your body as well. You get before 10, 15 years before people first start getting elevated blood sugar as a type 2 diabetic, they have hyperinsulinemia. And so they're already developing insulin resistance, and they have, so, you look at someone who looks reasonably well, but they're eating, standard garbage diet, and they're so, not really doing too well. You check their blood sugar, it's normal, HbA1c, normal, but their fasting insulin is sky high, right? They're moving quickly towards diabetes. But you can be in that state for 10, 15 years. And many doctors would actually consider that diabetes already. You already have peripheral insulin resistance, right? It's just that your pancreas is compensating for it by producing more and more and more insulin. And then it gets to the point where it can't compensate anymore and it starts to fail. And then you don't have enough insulin to drive this stuff home, or you get so resistant that you can't drive it home for the insulin you have. And all of a sudden your blood sugar starts climbing up. But you're in a disease state 10, 15 years before that.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions just about the ranges that you find optimal. Like if somebody's listening, they have their labs with them, or they're going to get lab done, kind of like what they could be aiming for. So for free testosterone, or just testosterone for men, what's an optimal range for men to have their testosterone levels at?
So free testosterone, and go country by country, but like in Australia, it would be 600 to 900 is sort of an optimal
same with
range.
Canada.
Okay, yeah. So that would be more optimal range of your free testosterone, and most people aren't there. That's one thing that you notice, it does make a big difference. Diet actually makes a huge difference. I've had people on a carnivore diet, men in their 60s and 70s, and they'll increase their testosterone, free testosterone, by 30, 40% easily. One guy doubled his levels, and he was like 850, almost 900. And so that's optimal for a 25-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And this guy, it was sort of crude how he said it, but he was in his 70s. I think he was like 74. And he was saying, he's like, I just feel amazing. I feel like a teenager again. All I want to do is go to the gym and have sex with my wife, but he did not use more graphic language than that.
Right.
And so it was very funny, but it was also, very heartwarming in a sense that, you sort of gave this guy back his zest for life. And
Yeah.
he was a very happy man at that point. And it was great to see. And, others, I work with other people who are athletes, and I've just spoken to people who are athletes, and they just tell me like, hey, I've started doing this and I feel so much better. And their testosterone went from like, 450 to 1100. There's a guy who plays on the U.S.
Wow.
national team for rugby. And he was telling me that as well. He's not full carnivore, but he's eating mostly meat now, and sort of bit of sort of fruits and things like that here and there. But yeah, he more than doubled his testosterone levels just by changing his diet. So, people talk
Hmm.
about, well, you have to take this drug or that drug to give a competitive edge. No, you don't. You just eat meat and don't eat all this other crap that can disrupt your hormones. There's a lot of hormone disruptors in plants as well that can mimic estrogen and disrupt testosterone and cause just a complete imbalance of your hormones as well. And you get rid of all those things, and then all your steroid hormones and cortisol and glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, they're all made from cholesterol. So is vitamin D.
Hmm.
They're all made from cholesterol. And so, you're eating an abundance of this, and you're going to have more active and functional hormones as well. And you're not impeding the development and production of your hormones also. Carbohydrates as well, they obviously raise insulin. Insulin blocks the secretion and activity and function of human growth hormone, right? So this is something that people take as a performance enhancing drug, or just as anti-aging drug. They'll take these sorts of things to sort of get back up to younger levels. They feel a lot better. They age more gracefully, and they feel better. And obviously, athletes can perform better. This is famously the Liver King. More recently, got caught taking massive
Yeah.
quantities of human growth hormone, and he was even saying in some of these emails, he's like, "Yeah, I'm taking just insane amounts of growth hormone." And some of the guys are saying like, I know guys training for Mr. Olympia right now, and they're not taking half as much as this guy is, right?
Wow.
And but his IGF-1 marker wasn't all that high. He wasn't even getting up, and he was eating a lot of meat, but he was also drinking maple syrup. What the hell are you doing? So like he's taking in all of this growth hormone, and he's now eating a bunch of carbs and sugar, which is now blocking the action of that same growth hormone. So you're just shooting yourself in the
Interesting.
foot, and you're just wasting. I think you're spending like $11,000 a month on this
Yeah.
growth hormone. Just wasting it because of the carbs he was eating. That's I think that's probably the main reason why people recommend like not eating before you go to bed, because most of you people are eating carbs, and the biggest dose of growth hormone you get is 2 hours after you go to sleep, if you go to sleep
Hmm.
at a regular hour. And so you eat right before you go to bed, your insulin's up, and that blocks the secretion and the function action of that,
Hmm.
of the biggest hit of growth hormone every day. And then if you're eating carbs all day, you're just suppressing your growth hormone, because men secrete growth hormone about every 60 minutes, women about every 90 minutes. And so if you're eating carbohydrates, your insulin just constantly up. You're just blocking that. Is going to lead to dysfunction. And you just get rid of it. It just goes away, and all of a sudden your own natural growth hormone, testosterone, estrogen, they just balance out, and they start working a lot better.
Yeah. For females, what's kind of the optimal testosterone range there?
Oh, I wouldn't know it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Obviously they do need testosterone. Actually,
Yeah.
more testosterone than they need estrogen, but they need a lot more estrogen than men. We need estrogen. Men need estrogen as
Okay.
well. Um, Men need obviously less, but it's hard to test for estrogen. You have to get sort of high sensitivity estrogen tests. Not many
Okay.
places do it, like Australia as a country don't do it. And so you can't really check what a man's estrogen level is. If it's not above like 80, it's
Okay.
it's not gonna show up. So they just say below 80. But you actually need some. You need it sort of between sort of like 60 and 80 for men, and below that, you can actually have harm come to you. And like men who have lower estrogen, like lower than that, can actually have libido issues and other sorts of issues. to their health and their hormonal health, you need estrogen. Estrogen is
Yeah.
good for you.
It,
You just don't want too
it's
much
that
or too little.
it's that balance. Do you know roughly a good estrogen level for women, like the optimal there?
Well, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Um,
If not, it's okay. We can.
I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. Normally, I have the sort of
Okay.
these things with me because I'm
Yeah.
more new to the functional medicine side of things, so I still have to sort of look them up and I have to have them in front of
Yeah.
me. But some things I do remember, like B12, because that one's just so ridiculous that that like the
Yeah.
range is in malnutrition state.
I probably eat more meat than like the average person. And when I got my B12 levels checked, I was probably like just below 400, which is
Yeah.
crazy. I definitely not eating enough.
What it could, yeah, what could be an absorption issue, probably not, being, as young as you are. There are other things that can impede the absorption. Obviously there's pernicious anemia that you need to think about, and just eating, red meat in particular, focusing on that. And it can
Right.
also just take a while to build up. How long have you been eating more meat?
Oh man, a year, but I would say that for sure we don't eat always like red meat. It's kind of a mixture between like chicken and pork because they're a little bit more affordable. Yesterday, I was just able to snag a strip loin on discount. It was like $5 a pound, and I'm like, I'm buying that.
Yes.
That's really
Yeah.
affordable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, if you are below 400, I would definitely recommend getting a shot and then bumping yourself up, because it can take a while to actually increase your levels. And if you're below 400, I mean, you can be getting neurological damage.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would definitely get that a
For
shot,
sure.
which is easy to
Take
do.
some,
Yeah.
take the supplement or the shot. In regards
Yeah.
to,
Well, you can. I mean, sublingual is better. I mean, if you're thinking it
yeah.
might be like an absorption issue as well, um,
Oh, I
might
see. Yeah.
that might be an issue. So sublingual is just kind of sort of skip that. But really, if you're below 400, you really just need to get out of that, And so
Okay.
just getting an IM injection is the
All right.
best way to do that.
All right. I'll make a doctor's appointment for that. For reverse T3, do you want that high or low?
It's probably low. Yeah, you want it lower.
Low reverse TB.
Yeah. So the range is sort of 1 something to 550. You really want it below sort of like 300, sort of 200-300, and
Okay.
then you also want to look at the ratio of your free T3 to reverse T3, and
Okay.
then you sort of see that ratio and you multiply by 100, and you want that sort of in a specific range, sort of between like 2 and 3 roughly. And if you
Okay.
don't get that, then that's sort of out of whack. You're not getting the bang for your buck that you should be with the free T3.
All right. For fasting insulin, what's your kind of higher range? Like when what's your goal for a fasting insulin?
Christ, what is it offhand? I don't want to say something wrong. What the hell?
I know a doctor that I've worked with likes to see like I think below 80 in whatever units we have here in Canada.
Might be a different unit.
Okay.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I can actually send you this stuff, offline, and it just sort of for your own
Sure.
for information. But I don't want to say something that I don't remember perfectly, and that sort of trips people up.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So now we're getting to the end here. I have a couple of questions, but these hopefully you can answer in like a yes, no. We don't have to dive into them in just a couple, a sentence.
Sure.
This is kind of like the practical advice part for me and for people listening. Do you know what you spend on groceries monthly?
Not all that much, because I buy meat in bulk, and it's
Yeah.
cheaper that way. So I go to Costco and get a whole bunch of meat. So I think I figured at one point I was spending about, what was it? It probably about $180 to $200 Australian a week. And that was eating like a kilo of like ribeye a day, And so Yeah, probably about $200 a week if I'm eating like that. But there's also obviously much cheaper cut. So it would be $200 a week or less, definitely. And that's for,
Okay.
me who's eating, 2 kilos a day plus, and I'm 6'3" and 230, 40
Yeah,
pounds.
you eat a lot more than most people. So
Okay.
I think that's roughly 640 per month. I'm just interested in that, just because like when I go out and do grocery shopping, I'm like, hey, what's like the a good sustainable for my pocketbook way of eating carnivore right now? Obviously you go for the sales and you buy in bulk.
Right.
And I'm gonna just start to earn money soon as a resident, so I it's interesting. I think a lot of people might wonder, like, how much do you eat, how much do you spend on groceries?
It's well, and there's no waste as well. Like I'm not throwing out
Yeah,
things because they're going bad. Never,
that's
And
true.
so, there's everything I buy, I use, and you can absolutely buy cheaper stuff. Pork is much cheaper. Chicken is much cheaper. Ground beef is much cheaper. Chuck is much cheaper. Chuck roast or chuck steaks, brisket, cheap as hell. Great fat level, and just ground beef's great. You want to
Yeah.
get fattier. I go to the butcher and tell them to add a lot of fat into it. I get like 50, 60%. As opposed to 50-50 or 60-40, as opposed to like 80-20. Like I don't even bother with that lean.
Do you end
lean.
up like drinking the grease, or you just like cook it and it renders part of the, like with the meat?
It'll render it out, and then I spoon it back on, and that helps with browning. And the Maillard reaction, if people want to look that up, that's the name of it. And then I sort of pour it back over at the end of it, or I might melt butter onto it if there's not a lot of tallow or something like that that's melted out. But also use that for the next thing I'm cooking. I'll have those beef drippings in the pan for the next thing I'm going to cook. I cook in a lot of fat because I like that sort of, it gets in like sort of a nice crispy, crunchy outside. And
Yeah.
when I'm cooking steaks or things like that.
Okay. What's a typical day of eating in your life? Do you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And then roughly, I assume it's pretty straightforward. Like, what do you eat and drink?
Yeah, I'm just drinking water. Or I'm not hungry in the morning, which is great. It saves a lot of time, especially on days that I'm, only getting a couple hours of sleep, because I can just, I can sleep, I can maximize sleep, and then just, get out the door, take a shower, take the out the door, and I get to work. And I don't need to stop for lunch, and don't slow down towards the end of the day because I haven't had dinner. And I get home, maybe I'll work out if I can, if I have time, and otherwise I just go home and I'll just have a big steak. So it's usually like a big ribeye, but those have literally doubled in price in the last year, which it
Yeah.
was just insane. And so I usually do more like strip loin, like sort of New York sort of things, and that's even cheaper. That's a lot cheaper. And so I'll just have sort of around 2 kilo or a kilo, sorry, of or 2 pounds or so of fatty beef, and I'll melt butter into it.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. And if I have enough of that and enough fatty meat, that I find I'm really not hungry the next day. If I'm working out a lot and I'm lifting weights a lot, my demand for food is much higher. I'll literally eat double the amount. I'll probably have like 2 kilos, like 4 pounds a day. I'll need that. And I'll just put on muscle very, very quickly if I do that.
Jeez.
And so at the hospital, if I find that like I really do want to have lunch or get something to eat, they like know my order at the cafeteria. It's just like 10 eggs and 6 long strips of bacon. Like the bacon they have here is massive. So it's not like just a little thing
Yeah.
of bacon. It's like the whole pork belly, with like with like the tenderloin on this side is this strip over all the way down. So it's like literally like it's like a foot long, and it's like
Amazing.
six of those big things, and it's great. And so I have that, and or I'll have sort of 2 of those big steaks or 2 of those big portions of steak.
Okay. I'm going to have to try eating 2 pounds of steak, see if I can actually do it. It sounds amazing.
Well,
Do you?
just eat as much as you're hungry for, and eat as much as tastes good. And that's the trick
Yes.
is what tastes good, because our hunger signals are very different on a carnivore diet. And I think that you get that positive feedback for eating meat because your body wants it. And the difference between positive feedback for something that's good for you, like meat, or something that's bad for you, like addictive drugs, is that if something's addictive, it doesn't matter how much you eat, you're going to still want more, you're going to still want more, you're going to keep getting that positive feedback, you want more, you want more, you want more. Whereas if it's something that's good for you, that positive feedback will lessen the more you have it,
Okay.
and then all of a sudden your body doesn't want it anymore, and you don't get any positive feedback. And if you keep eating it, you'll actually get a negative feedback. And so when people are used to sort of overeating, they're like, "Oh, I hate eating this. I hate eating meat. It takes me 2 hours to finish a meal." And I ask them, like, "Well, did it? And it's like, I hate it. It tastes horrible." I was like, "Okay, dude, did it taste bad when you first started eating the meal? Like right when you started?" They're like, "Well, no, actually, it tasted really good, but I got halfway through it and it started tasting horrible, and it took me 2 hours to finish it from there." I was like, "Okay, that's how much you actually wanted, right? So
Okay.
stop eating. Eat until as much as you want to eat, right? But when you start going like, well, I don't want to eat this anymore. This doesn't taste good. Well, you clearly don't want to eat it, and you should just stop. Even if you have leftovers, I endeavor to have leftovers. I try to cook more than I think I'm going to want because I
Yeah.
want to saturate my body's demand for food, and that's how I do it is by taste.
Okay. Smart. Do you ever drink milk?
Very, very rarely. It's dairy in general is can be pro-inflammatory with just the casein proteins in it, and there's enough lactose in milk that it can spike your insulin as well. So I avoid it for that reason primarily.
Okay. And in Australia and in Canada, we can't get raw milk. So the
Yeah,
milk that we can get is sugar.
yeah, and so getting raw milk is better definitely, and unhomogenized milk is also better.
Right. Okay. Do you ever have some carbs or fruits or veggies?
No, no,
Just not
just
even a temptation.
no. Like it's
Does
it's
d-
you know. Sorry, you're gonna say?
does the smell of fresh baked bread ever tempt you? My wife has been baking bread last couple of days, and I'm like, it smells really good. But I wonder if for you that you've been adapted to just eating meat, like, does it even like trigger a desire to eat it?
If I'm hungry, yeah, because
Yeah.
then your brain's
Okay.
telling you like, wow, that's something that's energy, and you need some, and you walk in there like, the big good smell good.
Yeah.
But I was in Chicago visiting my cousin and his wife, who's also a physician down there, and and then they took us to a bakery that they really liked, and they were getting some things for themselves and the kids. We were looking there, and there was just it was just pastries galore, just frosting and cream and all this sort of stuff, and it looked really good. I remember thinking, I was like, I can't smell any of this. I can't smell it. Like, that's weird. I was like, why am I not smelling this? And like even had some like brought it up close. I'm like, I really can't smell it. What the hell is going on? And I hear people walk in like, oh my God, it smells amazing. And it was just like, so, but I wasn't hungry. And so I
Yeah.
just didn't register. So it was sort of funny, but
Interesting.
yeah, if I'm hungry, I hadn't eaten enough, and like maybe haven't eaten that day or the day before or something like that. I'll go on like, bread smells good. Okay, I need to eat something. And so
Okay.
that's usually my trigger. Yeah.
When you cook your steaks, do you add a lot of salt or kind of like on the lower end of salt?
Oh, I've been using less and less salt as I go, and I mean, I even stopped using salt for a month. I felt fine. It felt good.
Oh, wow.
There are a lot of there's a lot of long-term carnivores actually swear by it. They think that actually salt is actually not good for you if you're on a carnivore diet, and it can be sort of addictive and and not optimal as well if you're doing a carnivore diet. And it was, and
Okay.
they sort of argue that we didn't start using mineral salt added to our food until after the agricultural revolution. And then we actually needed it, we sought it, more became, that's where
Mm,
salary comes from is salt, that guy's not worth his
yeah.
salt. He's paid in salt. The Roman legions were paid in salt, all these things like that. There's even a book called Salt. It was the history of the world as seen through the use of salt, and it's actually pretty crazy. It's a very, very important substance for a very long time. But
Yeah.
if you are on a carnivore diet, a lot of people have been doing this for 20 years plus, and they haven't used salt the whole time. They're like, I feel much better without it. So I tried it, and things just tasted a little more bland. But I felt great. I didn't get cramps. I didn't get any sort of problems. And I started just using a bit of salt because I dry my meat a bit, and I sort of salt it, put it on racks. I could do that without the salt, but it just sort of helped the process better if I used a
Yeah.
bit of salt. And so I sort of went back to using it as well, but I use less and less. And
Okay.
yeah, so at this point, I don't use much, but I still use a little.
Okay. So, yeah, as Brazilian, we like to use the coarse salt, just douse it both sides, throw it on the grill, and you're good to go.
Little
Sometimes it's
salt
too
bay. Yeah.
salty.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I salt to taste, and I try not to eat processed foods. So if I do the math, I'm like under what the guidelines say, and I don't even really trust the guidelines that much. But it's hard to go more than like 2 grams of sodium if you just eat natural food.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. And, I don't think there's necessarily anything, medically dangerous with salting to taste. And it seems that if you just salt to taste and you're not over salting and saying like, oh, that doesn't taste good, again, getting that positive feedback versus a negative feedback, that that doesn't seem to cause probably that's not causing high blood pressure or anything like that. It's just, uh, it's fine as long as you're just salting to taste. It seems medically from a gross medical perspective.
All right. For the average person listening, does it matter if they eat grain-fed beef versus grass-fed, grass-finished beef? And same with eggs, like free range versus traditional or
I
soy
think
filled.
you're going to be better off. I mean, especially with like regenerative agriculture. I mean, this has just been shown that the meat has like triple the amount of nutrients in it. It has triple the amount like vitamins and minerals and things like that in it. For eggs, I saw a guy who does regenerative agriculture, where you're just you're just rotating pastures and you're moving cows and sheep. They can be pastured on the same land because they eat different grasses because different grasses are poisonous to different cows and sheep and things like that. And then you, a couple of days later, when all the feces are there, there's bugs on it, and you let the chickens through, and they eat the bugs, and they upcycle all the
Interesting.
proteins and things like that. And they found that his eggs raised in that way, like the amount of, I think it was folate in like a normal egg in the U.S. on average, it was like 41 milligrams or something like that. His had over 1,000, right? Same
Wow.
egg, right? So it made a big ass difference in that. And so I think if you can get that, right? If you can't get that or you can't afford that, grain finished is fine. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
It's it's not the best, but it is still better than anything else. I think it is like the Olympics, right? So silver medal lost to gold, right? But silver medalists also beat everyone else on earth, right? So it's actually a pretty good position to be in. And so if you can't get gold position, like obviously you want silver. And I think of grain finished beef in that way. 80% of its life is going to be on grass anyway. That's just the last couple months or so is going to be on grain.
Okay, makes sense. Do you take any supplements at all?
No.
Okay. Do you ever recommend supplements to your functional medicine patients?
We do.
'Cause
Well, we get all sorts, right? So I try and get them on a carnivore diet, but if they're already deficient and their B12 is 250, like they need to supplement, and that they need to do that quickly because they can harm their body. So I would give them a shot there at the clinic. And if they were deficient in different sorts of things, I would try to bump them up. I think I can get them on a carnivore diet or some more, whole food, meat centric, high fat diet, they're going to correct a lot of that themselves. But supplements can help get you there, or even eating more liver. Liver is very nutrient, especially think about that regenerative farmers cow liver. I mean, that stuff must be just glowing with the amount of and things like that in there. And that you can sort of eat that, but sometimes it can be too much. You don't need all that much of it. You think about it, if you take down a buffalo, a big adult male buffalo, big ass thing, it's gonna have thousands of pounds of meat, and that's gonna feed you as an individual for like 2 years. It's gonna have one liver. It's gonna be a big liver, but it's gonna have one of it. And so you have to put that in proportion. You're gonna have hundreds of pounds of muscle and fat to every pound of liver, right? So I just try to tell people to think about that. And early on, though, liver can be very good for you. And if you're eating sort of a standard diet and it's nutrient deprived, or even a plant-based diet that's very nutrient deprived, liver's your best friend. That's going to catch you up and get you a lot of nutrients very quickly, and they're bioavailable. They're very available to us to use right away. And so I do recommend people doing that early on. having a bit more liver or having specific supplements to catch them up, and then checking again in a couple months, see where their levels are, and then, coming off of them at that point.
Okay.
If it would be
For the
maintained on a carnivore diet.
Yeah, for the patients that are transitioned to a carnivore diet, do you find the best way to do it is kind of cold turkey, or eliminate like fruits first or like veggies for like kind of stepwise fashion over a couple days or weeks?
It depends on the person. Um, I find that cold turkey is probably easiest for people to do. You strike while the iron's hot. If it's in their head, they're like, okay, I'm going to do this. Best to just do it and just like
Right.
throw out everything in the house that they don't want, and just get onto it. A lot of studies show, like with quitting smoking, quitting alcohol or drugs, that cold turkey has the best efficacy. And
Okay.
but people are different. Some people do quit by gradually bringing it down. They're able to do that. But I mean, think about people on like methadone. They put them on methadone to try and lower the dose slowly and then get them off heroin. And I mean, I've seen a lot of people in hospital settings who've been on methadone, come to the emergency department, they've been on methadone for 30 years and their dose is higher than when they started. I'm like, okay, that's going in the wrong direction, isn't it? That's not
Yeah.
really getting this person off of it. It's actually getting worse. And so, anyway, it's like people that are, quitting smoking for 20 years, oh yeah, I'm trying to quit. I'm just cutting down. And they never do. They end up, eventually they quit, but eventually they just stop. And so eventually you just have to stop. And I think a lot of people do best with that. And just like if you're quitting smoking, you don't want to leave, a couple cartons of cigarettes hanging around the house, right? You throw them out, get rid of them,
Yeah.
out of sight, out of mind. You just keep the temptations away from you. And so I think that works the best if you're able to do that. If you're not, if you have people in the house and you're like, oh, I don't think I can just do that quite yet, then going in a stepwise manner is fine. And you'll help people do that as well. I think the first thing you cut out is alcohol, sugar and carbohydrates. First and foremost, get those the hell out of there. Anything sweet out of the house. And then you get rid of nightshades. Those are more harmful things like potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. Just get rid of those, right? And then you
Hmm.
start getting rid of all like the seeds, beans, nuts, legumes. You're gonna have a lot of lectins. They're gonna have a lot of defense chemicals in those areas. I mean, there's just 5 kidney beans undercooked can actually put you in the hospital because you need to cook it to denature these toxins, right? And so
Okay.
lectins, a lot of lectins are heat sensitive, but not all of them are. Not all of them will be completely denatured by this. And a lot of oxalates are not heat sensitive at all. It doesn't matter. So, you have to be mindful of these things. I would also get rid of high oxalate things like spinach as well. And then you just sort of stepwise do that in those sort of steps. But I would have a plan. I would not just go, oh yeah, I'll sort of cut it out. Well, and I'll sort of, well, when I just went food shopping, so I'll just when that's gone, I'll start it. They never start it. Like it never started. That's one
Yeah.
of those things in sales. If if they don't buy it right then, if they say, oh, I'll come back and think about it, 95% never come back, right? So, if they say like, well, as soon as I finish this shop, I just spent $200 on groceries. As soon as that's finished, then I'll start. They're never going to start. You strike while the iron's hot.
You got to do it.
Yeah, so you have a plan. Okay, I'm dropping carbs and sugar today. And then next week, I'm dropping nightshades. And the week after that, I'm dropping nuts, beans, seeds, legumes, everything like that. And then I'm dropping greens. And then I'm full carnivore. And so you have that, you have it on the calendar, like this day I'm doing that. You need that, you need to do that, or else you just never will.
Yeah. Makes sense. This next question's about you and kind of your vision for the next couple of years. What's your vision for how you want to practice medicine next 5 to 10 years?
So that's difficult. That's something I've been thinking about a lot. I love neurosurgery. I'm really passionate about it. I just love being in the operating room. That's just my happy place. I just love being there. I love operating. I love the environment. I love people. I love being able to help people, and doing the procedures are just intensely fascinating. And a lot of things are very life and death. Someone's going paralyzed and need to restore function to their legs, or from their neck down. They've had an accident. They've had a lot of blood pressing on the brain. You need to relieve that. You need to elevate this flap, and and get the blood
Yeah.
out and save this person's life. I think those are amazing surgeries and things that you can do for people. And it's very rewarding to do that, even if it's at 3 a.m. and you end up not sleeping at all that night and you have to work another 14-hour day the next day. I find that very rewarding. I really love the functional medicine side of things as well. I like dealing with patients on a one-to-one basis. I like having a bit more time to sit down, have a longer consultation, and really go into detail about their health and their lifestyle and try to fix the problems that is happening in their life and get them better and get them well and get them off medication, have them lose weight and gain health. I really, really like that. It's extremely rewarding. I think that's one of the most important things that we've lost as doctors. We're now prescribers generally.
Yeah.
We're just salesmen for pharmaceutical companies. That's not right. We are supposed to be arbiters of health, and we're not doing that anymore. And so I think functional health and medicine, preventative medicine, I think gets back to that. We're trying to get people healthy and keep them healthy and get them off medication as opposed to putting them on medication. I would like to do both. I would like to incorporate that into neurosurgery. I would like to give that to my neurosurgical patients as well, and try to get people who are having, pinched nerves and things like that, maybe try dietary measures and reduce their inflammation, see if they even need surgery, see if they can avoid it. And if they can't, they're going to get a better outcome. They're going to have better wound healing. They're going to be able to lose weight. They're going to have a better time of it as well. And being able to tell people in those consultations, hey, this may not help you now, but this is something that will help you heal, and this will help this, and it'll help that, and with brain cancers and things like that. Getting them enrolled in these human trials with ketogenic metabolic therapy, and try to have that as an adjunct to the standard of care to see if I can get them better as well. So I would like to incorporate both. Whatever I do, I will absolutely be incorporating everything I've known and have studied with metabolic health and nutrition, how it relates to health and disease. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like in 10 years, though. I hope it includes both of those, though.
Yeah, that's really neat. And things they'll unfold and you roll with the punches. That's what's really cool, is that you have the knowledge to help people truly, like, holistically.
Boom.
The name of the podcast is Born Unstoppable. What are the 3 traits that you think make somebody unstoppable?
Well, I think having control of your own health is very important. If you don't have control of your own health, you don't have agency over your own life. You're dependent on other people to control your health, and so you're at the whims of other people. You're at the whims of the medical system, and however good or bad your medical system is, you don't want to be dependent on it. You want to be self-governing, self-supporting. So I think your health is if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And that's a saying that's been around for centuries. And so I think that's number one. And then I think also just having that agency over yourself and your own decisions and living your life and dealing with your own consequences. If you don't have consequences for your actions, then your actions don't matter much, and people lose their direction, they lose their purpose, and things stop mattering as much. And so I think that if we go back to more of an individualistic sort of approach, where people just sort of live their own life and they take care of themselves and they work for themselves and choose the life that works best for them. I think that's something that makes you pretty formidable force. We had all these pioneers that went out west in Canada and America 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300, 400 years ago, and all the people that were living there already independently. Those people were very, very, very strong, capable individuals that could literally live in any environment and not only survive but thrive. And so I think that having that ability to be independent is also very important, which health is a major part of that. You don't have that otherwise. Third, no, I think that covers a lot of it. But having very good social networks and family, I think, is very important. I think that's something that we've lost as well. We sort of become disseminated around the world very easily. used to be that people just sort of lived in their area and they grew up with their parents and their cousins and their siblings and their grandparents and their great grandparents and their uncles and aunts and second cousins and all that sort of stuff. And you just had this very tight knit family structure. And then we started moving out and out and out. And now, you start a family, you move to a different city, and, you call your parents on the weekends, maybe. And, and that's sort of the whole time. And I think that's something that we've lost as well. And I think family is very, very important. It's not good enough, I think, just to have your own nuclear family, which I think is very important. The nuclear family structure, that's very important for kids. All studies show that kids raised in a nuclear family do better economically. They're more prosperous. They're more economically successful. They're more successful in school and academics and things like that. So it's very important. But also having that broader family structure as well, having the grandparents around and the cousins and the siblings and everything like that. I think that's very important as well.
Makes sense. Okay, so health, being independent, kind of strong and persevering there, and then also the relationships. Truly, this is the last question. I think you hinted at it at the beginning in terms of productivity. How do you stay so productive and get so much done as a neurosurgery resident? You do podcasts, YouTube, you have Patreon, and you got the functional practice as well. Like, do you have your productivity secrets of like a Google Calendar, a certain amount of time you sleep, or like what are your kind of practical tips for being productive, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think number one is my diet. I would not be able to do this if I was eating 5 times a day because I just wouldn't have time. And I think I free up about 6 hours of my day where I'm not thinking about preparing or eating food. So that saves a huge amount of time. I'm preparing and eating and done with eating for the entire 24-hour period in 1 hour. So people talk about this like, oh, I have a 16-hour, 16-hour, 8-hour eating, fasting period, an 8-hour eating period. And, what's your split? Someone asked me that. I was like, I don't know, like 1 in 23. No, I just eat once and then I'm out of there. And that gives me a huge amount of time, and that frees up hours of the day. But I think the main thing is just being really interested in what you're doing. I wouldn't be doing these things if I wasn't passionate about it, if I wasn't interested in it. I love neurosurgery, and I love all different aspects of medicine. And it was very hard for me to pick a specialty because I just wanted to do everything. And but I decided on neurosurgery. I'm very passionate, but I'm also very passionate about the functional medicine side of things and the carb. I'm very, very passionate about that, and something I'm very interested in. I think it's something that will revolutionize medicine back to how we've done it for like 3,000 years, which is food is medicine. Let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food. If you don't get that right, your body doesn't work right. You're going to contend with a lot of diseases that don't need to exist, right? And so I think that's going to be that is a major game changer. You stop eating this crap, you stop having these diseases, because I don't think they're diseases per se. I think that the majority of the chronic diseases that we're treating these days are not diseases, but toxicities and malnutrition. So toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition. So namely, too many plants that were not designed to eat and break down and detoxify properly, and not enough meat, which we are designed to. And so because I'm passionate about that and I get to apply that in the functional medicine aspect of things, that's really important to me as well. And I really like doing that. That adds something to my life and my professional practice. And then the YouTube side of things, that's something that I think is very important because I can disseminate information a lot easier and a lot quicker to a lot more people that I would never get the chance to meet otherwise. I sort of made a grassroots movement in Perth. Everyone here was vegan. We're going that way.
Wow.
And when I told them I only ate meat, people thought I was out of my mind. My girlfriend now, she said that when she met me and I said that, she was just like, this guy's nuts. Yeah. And she thought I was, now she does it and she feels better and she feels a lot better. But it's just people around me just talking to them, having conversations like this and telling them about the things that I found and showing them studies and showing them the literature and the evidence for it. They're like, damn it, you know what? That makes sense. And they just start eating meat. They start eating more meat, or they start going carnivore. And so now more and more and more people around me are doing that. And And you even talk to people and they know it by name. They're, oh, you're doing a carnivore diet. Oh yeah, my brother does that. He really likes that. Whereas before it was just like, what the hell are you talking about? But
Yeah.
talking to people, talking to patients about it, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of information to go over. People have a lot of questions. And so doing the YouTube side of things allows me to say, hey, why don't you just go take a look? I've got these videos where I set the stage for them, like in my functional medicine practice, and just say, hey, here's what I think is going to work for you. This is going to be a big benefit to you. Check out these videos, specifically these ones, and come back and we'll have a chat about it.
Okay.
And
Neat.
so it's a lot easier. So I'm very passionate about that as well. And, having conversations like this, I'm very interested in this subject. I like talking about it. And so I'm very, very happy to have conversations with yourself and others who are interested as well. If people are interested in what I'm interested about, that's a win-win. And then
Yeah.
doing my videos has allowed me to meet a lot of people that I've really admired and looked up to. And hopefully, and I know it's going to allow me to meet more and more and more people that I'm extremely, inspired by. And so these are all passion projects. And so I want to do them. I want to do them more than I want to sit on the couch and watch TV or play video games
Right.
or go to the bar and get drunk or, do other things. And, when my knee works properly, I like playing rugby too. And that's a passion for me. So
Okay.
being productive, it's the old adage that if you find something that you love doing, that you never have to work a day in your life. Right. And
Right.
so that's sort of what I found. I found 3 things that I'm really passionate about and I really love. And, if you find yourself in a situation where you really don't like where you're at, you don't like what you're doing, maybe think about things that you do like and see what you can do. And maybe, in your free time, in your spare time, focus on those things. And you have to work towards them, and it's not going to come overnight, but you start putting more time and effort into that side, that will grow and that will build. And eventually you may be able to turn that into a career that you're passionate about. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's probably the main, for me, I'm a big procrastinator. I like things that was like, oh, I don't want to do that paper or something like that. But when it's something that I'm really passionate about, it's just like, that's all I want to do. And
Okay.
so that for me is my trick on how to be productive is I'm really only selectively productive. I'm only productive on things that I actually enjoy doing. But that seems to be, so that's when I've surrounded myself in, and all the things that I'm doing are things I'm very passionate about.
Okay, that makes sense. Do things you're passionate about. If people want to learn more about you, connect with you, where should they do that?
Yeah. So my main social media presence is on Instagram. It's just Anthony Chaffee, MD, and then my YouTube channel is my main platform as well. And that's again Anthony Chaffee, MD is the channel, and I have a list of the podcasts on there. I have different playlists if you want to look at. If they want to get started or learn what I think are the more important videos to watch, you go to the Carnivore Starter Kit is the playlist I have there, and then the podcast I have is called The Plant Free MD, and that's available on YouTube as well as one of those podcast playlists, and then or any podcast platform that anyone wants to listen to, Spotify, Apple, whatever, and that's just called The Plant Free MD, and that's available everywhere as well. And I have other social media stuff, but that can all be found through like my Instagram and things like that. And
Yeah,
the
cool.
description has all the links on the YouTube channel.
Well, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, I really enjoyed the last 2.5 hours. I'm sorry we went a little bit too overboard, but I feel like we covered as many topics as possible. And I'm very grateful for the knowledge that you shared, all without drinking a sip of water. And I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope that people listening found new information or were able to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some topics. So thank you very much. And will stay in touch. And I'm sure that as an up and coming doctor, I'm going to have many questions as a doctor to doctor level in the near future.
Sounds good. Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me on.